welcome to Muay Thai Bones.
It just started raining at the very moment we did Muay Thai Bones.
We're magical. Welcome to the Muay Thai Bones podcast. If this is the first time, it's going to be on the audio. If this is the first time listening to us, you're probably watching on our YouTube channel, on Sylvie's YouTube channel. But if you're a patron, supporter, you can get the full audio library of all our Muay Thai Bones stuff for even being a $1 supporter.
As a podcast, so however you listen to podcasts.
Yeah, totally. So you can subscribe to it on audio or watch it for free on YouTube. If you are listening on audio, that's Thailand tropical rain pounding on the roof that you're probably hearing. So, I don't know, are we going to be shouting?
I don't know how it's going to audio-wise, but we're down south. I just fought down in the south, and Hippie Singh Mani, who is the 105-pound legend of the South, set up this fight for me, and we're actually going to be driving through his hometown in the next hour or so. Nakhon Si Thammarat.
Okay. If you're new to the podcast, this is Sylvie, Duuglas-Ittu, veteran fighter, over 260 fights. This is your 266th fight.
Yep.
And I'm Kevin, her husband, supporter, photographer guy. And what we do is, in the Muay Thai Bones, we basically film and talk as we drive across Thailand, coming back usually from a fight of yours, and or filming for the Muay Thai Library.
Right.
The Muay Thai Library is our documentary. Often both in this case. The Muay Thai Library being our documentary film project where
archiving, preserving the changing technique of Muay Thai across Thailand.
Yes, and long-form training videos with legends and great fighters of the past, just to get their knowledge archived, like on film, so that 20 years from now, when Muay Thai has changed severely, it still exists. This is a really incredible project. Yeah, it's way bigger than anything we imagined.
We have more than 100 hours of long-form training in the library as we're speaking right now, which to me is incredible because it's actually a library. We called it a library when we had 3 hours in it, but it's actually a library now.
It's beyond. Is there something bigger than a library? I mean, a mega library, but I don't know. A Library of Alexandria.
Yeah.
But you didn't seem to like that one, a Library of Alexandria.
Who didn't seem to like that?
You.
Me?
Just now.
Yeah, no, that's great.
And I'm wearing, if you're watching on YouTube, I'm wearing the Muay Thai Bones t-shirt. Tim of Bleeding Edge helped design a t-shirt basically celebrating our podcast. As with all of Sylvie's apparel,
all my merchandise,
100% of the net profit goes to either the crew fund or to specific legends when shirts are focused on them. But if you get this t-shirt, all the library, the net profit goes to
the crew fund.
The crew fund, which is an annual distribution of funds to everybody filmed in the library. So you can support us that way.
Yes.
The Muay Thai Bones podcast, sorry for the long intro. I always like to if people just found us, what the hell is going on here?
What is this? Why are these people talking for hours in a car?
Yeah, totally.
Actually, incidentally, Kevin and I talk like this all the time. This drive home is going to be about 13 hours.
Ugh.
When I get driving, it'll be less. When Kevin drives,
yeah,
it's
Sylvie
more.
drives. We're not going to even say.
But the guy who cut my hair before, I've changed, it's the same barbershop but a different barber now, but the guy who was cutting my hair for about a year found Muay Thai Bones on the YouTube channel and was like, you should translate this into Thai. And I'm like, I would not put that yet on a translator to do 3 hours of our translation.
That would be very tough translation.
But sitting in a car talking about Muay Thai is something that people
and maybe
are
one
interested
day we can go back with patron support.
Yeah.
We can go back and translate into Thai, and maybe even translate the library into Thai.
Yeah.
Because it'll be important for Thais as well.
Stay right.
Okay. So what we do in the Muay Thai Bones, those of people have been begging for another episode. We just have not. You have not been fighting
as much. It's COVID right now, so fights have been non-existent for like 6 months, and then now I'm starting to fight again, but it's again just kind of like kicking back up. So
Well, yeah, we used to fight 3 times a month. Before that, even 4 times or more, but now it's about once a month. We're going to try to keep up with these bones. People love them. We love doing them. It passes the time in the car. We talk about really important stuff, though. There are some very good Muay Thai podcasts out there, but there's nothing like what we bring. I'm kind of impressed by our podcast. We talk detailed technique, Muay Thai technique. We talk Muay Thai history. We talk big philosophical ideas about not only Muay Thai, but even spiritual ideas, the connections with Buddhism. I don't know. We try to take very deep dives into Muay Thai. And one of my things is I really kind of don't like talking about stuff that's happening right now. I want somebody to listen to this in 10 years and be like, this is really interesting, rather than, oh yeah, so-and-so won on one championship. You know what I mean? So we try to move towards kind of like timeless, deep topics. Something that you could always talk about.
A lot of what we talk about is not like answering things. It's like, so tell me definitively how things are scored. It's like, it's kind of interesting how things are scored, so let's talk about it, and here are some examples of when it's this way, and here are examples when it's that way, rather than like, a kick is worth 4 points. Like, we don't talk
Well,
like
you're
that.
leading right into our first topic.
Am I?
Yes, you are. That was
Accidentally?
very clever of you. So if you're not into whatever we're talking about,
Skip ahead.
20 minutes,
20 minutes
jump
or so.
jump 20 minutes ahead, and it'll be something else. We actually had a crazy thing happen.
The ant.
Yeah, we like pulled out of the parking lot of our. This is not what we normally talk about.
No.
Pulled out of the parking lot of our car, and there was some kind of like nut, giant alien nut had fallen from a tree onto the car. Right, baby?
Well, I was like, Kevin, you got to look at this thing that fell from the tree that's like wedged in the rearview mirror because it's so weird and cool looking. And then when I went to remove it, I was actually terrified of it and didn't want to touch it. But it seems to have been a Trojan horse of ants to the car. So we've had like a few hundred ants.
Well, we were at the gas station. We were just like, oh, there's one ant. Then there's 2 ants inside the car, and we're like, how did they get in? Are they getting in? And then we look outside, and they're like swarming on the outside of the car in like these pockets of nestiness.
Yeah.
So we just spent like 10 minutes, 20 minutes brushing the car off.
De-anting the car.
De-anting the car.
Yeah.
So if you see us picking at something suddenly.
It's ants.
Actually, I think we got most of them.
I will train them to do my bidding, but
Yeah.
it might take a little while.
Okay, so this first topic, we write the topics down as they just come to us during the week or month, however long it's been. And this one was just something that occurred to you, I think a week ago.
Yeah, if that.
It came from watching Muay Thai on television or something. You want to lead the way on this? This is about Muay Thai scoring and how Westerners, including us.
I'm uncomfortable doing the lead-in because I tend to be so abstract. But basically, a lot of people ask us as an authority to explain Thai scoring.
Well, first off, we're not an authority.
We're not an authority, which
Yeah.
is why when I answer, I'm like, there's a tendency towards this, and this is how it differs from how it's scored in the West, so at least now you understand the difference. But you can't, in Thai scoring, say, this is how it's always going to be, and this is how it never is, because there's a lot of
Gradation.
feeling. Like we're always talking about the narrative scoring of Thailand, and when something is narratively scored, there's a feeling about the fight that influences it, rather than like I wrote down on a calculator how many times someone touched someone else, and you have judges, right? Like it's not how many goals you score in soccer, you have judges. So it can be a little bit tricky, and then there are times when we're watching Muay Thai where we understand for the most part Thai scoring, and something happens that we're like, I don't understand how they arrived at that.
Mystified. Well, so part of the way when we talk about Muay Thai scoring is a lot of it is our own reflection upon our own past misunderstandings.
Yeah, and
So we gradually, been here 8 years, we have gradually corrected ourselves.
And in being a fighter myself, Kevin comes to my fights, he films my fights. Sometimes when Kevin films me, he has an impression of the fight from having filmed it, from watching it through a tiny lens. It's very different from if he had watched it just as an audience member, and then it's different again when we watch the footage that he's taken. Like, there's this weird rippling effect of where you're standing and how far away from the fight you are, whether you're watching on TV or live or anything. Like, I've likened it before to when you go to a comedy show, how funny the audience finds the comedian is going to influence directly how funny you find the comedian's jokes. This happens in live Muay Thai, where you're like, oh my God, that was a blowout. Whereas when you watch it on TV and it's not live and you're not jiving with the audience, you're kind of like, that was really close.
Yeah, TV kind of creates a more analytical separation. You get separated out and you can see techniques more clearly.
Yeah,
like your point of view is not distorted by where you're sitting in the stadium or
always
around the
remember,
ring.
we were going to watch on our phone. We were showing one of my trainers at Lana Muay Thai a fight, and we didn't have the sound on, and he's like, put the sound on. Like, you can't watch a fight without the sound, because you have to hear the gamblers, you have to hear the crowd, you have to know how other people are experiencing it to know.
Well, let me just pull back for a second, because if someone's listening to this and they're not that familiar with Muay Thai or Thailand's Muay Thai, the reason why we're talking about Thailand scoring is because we're very used to this big gap between the way the Westerners perceive fights, read fights, and the way Thais read fights. That there's there are very large principal differences between the two, and for many years, Westerners would feel like Thais are biased against them because they'd come and fight, and they're like, I was doing all the things that win a fight in my country.
And then they gave it to the Thai.
And then they give it to the Thai, and they feel like the Thais are biased against Westerners. They basically are cheating in the judging. And it might happen like that occasionally. You've had very few bad decisions in over 200 fights. We can almost always see where the decision comes from. Mm-hmm. But it's most likely, if you feel like you've been ripped off and you have no clue where the decision came from, it probably is a mistranslation. Mm-hmm. And so the topic this time, it's helpful if you already understand this, what we're talking about. Like, if you're new to it, this might be a little bit weird. This is a nuanced reading that you came upon of helping understand how Muay Thai is scored fundamentally different than other places in the world, like kickboxing or UFC.
Yeah. So,
and well, let me one more thing. I want to I don't want you to go past that comedy analogy about how when you're in the audience of a comedian and he starts to or she starts to get on a roll, and you get to that point where you're like, everything they say is funny.
Yeah. Like
every and is like setting up.
Or a facial
funny
expression that if you're then listening to it as like a radio comedy show and you can't see the expression on their face, you're like, why is everyone laughing?
Yeah.
It's not funny.
So part of what we're talking about is that the scoring of a fight occurs in a live experience where the dominance of a fighter, the way that they're interacting with the gamblers, but also with the audience themselves and the anticipation of who's going to dominate whom and how, that once a fighter gets rolling, the audience starts to get a feeling, just like they would at a comedy show. The feeling is, this guy's pretty funny. And the next thing he's saying is pretty funny. But if you're watching it from a video screen, like through separation, you might be like, yeah, he's doing pretty good, but these other points are scoring against him. Yeah. And it can feel much closer than it might be. Yeah. Like, that's one of the first things that you wanted to point out. But the larger thing you wanted to go to was this analogy to poker, which is fucking incredible.
So in the West, in America, I've actually heard people who are pretty familiar with Thailand Muay Thai and like advocates of Muay Thai scoring becoming more regulated in the U.S. because it kind of varies state by state. They're always like, the judges don't know how to look at or score Muay Thai because they come from boxing or because they come from this. Like, they just aren't familiar enough with it. So if you're watching Muay Thai and you're scoring it compared to boxing or something, you're likening it to the wrong sport in order to kind of understand what it's like or how it should be scored. And so I came upon this realization the other day that it's like, you don't compare it to this other sport.
I think boxing is actually not the strongest example for your argument, because Muay Thai is scored much like boxing. It's not like sports where points are scored. Isn't that what you were kind of heading towards?
It is way farther from tennis or soccer or something like this. And like gymnastics is a judge, you know, like how well did you stick it or this kind of thing. I shouldn't talk about gymnastics. I don't know how it's scored. But my point that I was making, I'm not saying that it's so different from boxing.
Okay.
I'm saying that if you kind of understand boxing, but you're having a hard time understanding Muay Thai, trying to be like, I don't understand why it's not the same here, is that what you really should be comparing Thailand Muay Thai scoring to is poker, not another sport. Because the poker face, or the same concept of poker face and bluffing and holding your cards until the right moment, all plays into how Muay Thai is scored and performed in Thailand. That's why the kind of like brief rundown people give of like rounds 1 and 2 don't matter, 3 and 4 do, and then 5 you dance off. Like, that's okay, sure, like on like if you want to like put a sticky note on something, but actually if you're like a poker player who understands when to bluff, how your poker face, like if your poker face falls late in the game when you've already like driven the price way up and then your poker face falls, that's a terrible, terrible time. You're not going to win that game. We were watching a Muay Thai fight on TV where one fighter clearly won the entire fight in terms of like scoring performance, but his poker face fell apart near the end and he lost, and it's like, that's what happened. You could totally point to it. It was not like I have no idea what happened. Okay,
I want to move away. I'm not criticizing you, but I want to move away from the comparison to boxing.
Then don't compare to boxing.
Yeah.
Talk about poker.
Yeah, I want to contrast poker to point scoring. Like the way that people think of sports as scoring points.
Yeah, that's what I'm talking about too, so you can articulate what you mean.
Right, but boxing is a poor example because historically boxing is not entirely point driven. Like, I remember George Foreman talking about Muhammad Ali, and he's like, he would fight like a lamb for 7-8 rounds, like a lamb, and then he'd become a dragon.
Well, we just watched that Lomachenko fight where we're like, why is he waiting so long to do nothing?
He waited too long.
Yeah.
He waited too long. And even now, I think boxing probably has become much more point driven, like adding up
the amateur influence,
significant, well, and also UFC, significant strikes and counting number of strikes that have landed, that there is this concept of points. But historically, boxing had a richer feeling about who was dominating whom, and it wasn't just adding up things on a calculator. And I think what we're talking about, what's so beautiful about your poker analogy is it takes us very far from points on a calculator. Like, we like in the West to think about Muay Thai, kickboxing, everything in the larger context of how we score sports. Like you were saying, soccer or football, how many goals were scored.
Yeah, you're never like, did that score or not in soccer? It's like the ball went past the line.
Yeah,
It didn't.
you're counting points, and that as we try to understand from our Western concept, even if we understand what boxing, and there's many ways to get confused in Thailand scoring, but this is a very particular element of Thailand scoring, which is if you're just trying to figure out what scores and how much, like there's a very big concern, like why don't punches score? Like why don't punches have as big a point than kicks? Right? When you're talking about that, you're still thinking in the framework of points being scored, like a basketball game. Like punches are only 1 point and kicks are 3 points, and you're like trying to add it up. this is what you're talking about in poker. It's an entirely different dimension of performance, which has to do with bluffing your hand.
Yeah, you can actually have a shit hand that literally when you add it up, your hand is worse than the person you just beat because you got them to fold.
Yeah.
You got them to fold, you win. Your hand doesn't even matter anymore. It doesn't matter what your cards are.
Yes.
You win. They folded.
And this is the complicated thing about Muay Thai, is that you're not just playing poker with another player. You have the gamblers all around you, and the gamblers are deciding whether or not they believe you.
Mm-hmm.
So it would be like if you're playing poker and you were bluffing, and all the gamblers were like, I believe his hand's bigger.
Yeah.
The opponent might fold because the gamblers believe, it's not just whether you believe him,
Mm-hmm.
but it's whether or not the gamblers believe him,
Yeah.
which adds this additional pressure. Many times we're watching a fight and we're like, that fighter's in it.
Yeah.
He's in it.
Yeah.
And then he suddenly is like, I'm not in it anymore.
Yes.
Like, do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And it's because he got the message from the gamblers that this guy's hand was better.
Yeah. Yeah.
Do you
And
agree with that?
something that Pyro Noi, when we interviewed him,
Well, who is he?
Pyro Noi was a fighter from the Golden Age. He was half of the fight of the century when he fought Rambo. We just put him in the Muay Thai Library. He's very cool. We were interviewing him about how things have changed from when he was a fighter to now, and he was talking about how in the Golden Age there was much more emphasis on entertaining the audience and making yourself memorable. And he was saying that nowadays gamblers have to trust you. Like, gamblers have to believe in you, and what they believe right now is power. Whereas before, the influence of gambling was less like, you better not fucking lose, so you could kind of like experiment a little bit more. But like hitching gamblers' belief to a fighter gives that fighter power. So gamblers love someone like Seksan, who he will lose. He doesn't lose often, but he can lose. But even if he loses, he fights hard. Like, you're not getting a fighter who might fold. You're not getting a fighter who's like, I put money on you, and they're like, I don't know if his pair of twos is aces, and so they fold. And so those are fighters who gamblers really love. That's a power that they really love. And I think that's something that gamblers like about me, being small and being able to fight bigger, is that if I go into a space where people don't really know me, those gamblers can make a lot of money because people are not going to put money on a small farang.
Right.
But I'm also dependable in that one of the things that the owner of Petang Pong, which became an all-female gym for a while, and I had fought his fighters and he really liked me, something that he said to me was, Sylvie fights all 5 rounds, she's crazy. Gamblers love that. Like,
yeah, it's because they put the money on you and they don't have to worry whether or not you're going to put full commitment to it.
Which is also a bit like poker, where it's like you have really conservative players who don't want to put a lot of money on something unless they're really sure. They'll fold really fast and like come out if it's going to be too risky.
That's very interesting.
Versus the like kind of like
high roller
who like loses a lot of money but can like get it back through the like tenacity of continuing to play and kind of knows.
And we should
tricks.
say neither of us know poker very well.
No.
This is just our very like broad. If you're a poker player, you might have even more interesting things to say about this. We're just saying broadly in our understanding.
I imagine too that poker changed a great deal when online poker came to be, because you don't. How do you bluff in online poker? Like, you're not. Are there video? Like, are you like?
Yeah, I think we're in an area
playing a
where you
screen? I don't know. But
don't know
it's
anything.
the same thing of like, people complain about.
I mean, you bluff by putting more money in the pot. You're like, my hand is good. This is actually one of the interesting things. Thinking about poker, this is one of the interesting things about Samart and our perception of Samart, who's widely considered the greatest fighter of all time. One of the things that Samart was unbelievable at is that he would win fights never getting out of second gear.
Doing nothing.
But he wasn't doing nothing. He was a poker player, and he's like, I have a huge hand.
Yeah.
I have all these skills. I'm not going to bring them out. I'm just going to beat you with teeps and jabs and then I'll knock you out. But he created the illusion or the impression that he always had a really big hand, and so he'd seldom get called on what's really in his hand.
Yeah.
He played from the lead so much, and I think he had a magical quality about him because of that. He was like an incredible poker player because he never had to get it. He never had to sweat in the weirdest way. And I think, I don't know, that is not easy to do. He was fighting some of the toughest men in the history of Muay Thai.
Stay right.
People who their whole thing was to make you sweat.
Yeah.
And he had a way of just kind of like never getting out of second gear because he didn't have to. Now, we saw when he fought Diesel Noi, when he got out of second gear and Diesel Noi was maybe the greatest fighter for real and had size on him, we saw that when he went to third and fourth gear, he didn't have what he pretended to have against Diesel Noi.
Yeah.
But that almost makes the magical quality of him even bigger because he was able to bluff himself through fights. I had a very strong recollection of him fighting Nampan. Unfortunately, we only have like half the fight. It was edited together in some really crappy way where lots of rounds are missing and everything. It looked to me like Nampan had that fight.
Yeah, that was weird.
Yeah, but
it was a performance from Samart.
Well, you don't see the whole fight, so you can't really see what happened. But Samart was kind of like, I mean, Nampan was a relentless knee fighter, and Samart was just kind of like, just brushing him off. Even if Nampan would like throw him to the ground and fly over him with a knee into the ropes, like total dominant move. Samart's like whatever, and he won that fight as a poker player. I have this feeling like he won fights as a poker player.
Yeah.
And he was like the poker player.
Yeah.
And I don't know. I think you're really onto something about getting to if you're fighting in Thailand, understanding that Muay Thai is a poker game also. I mean, yes, there are points scored. If you get an 8 count in a round, you're probably losing that fight. If you get cut late, you might be losing that fight.
I have to correct myself. Pirot Noi is the one who was talking about how you had to entertain more.
Okay.
But I wrongly attributed to that interview the part where he was talking about how you had to get gamblers to believe in you and fight to the end. That was actually Wong Chinoy texting me. He said that he had a brother or a friend who was a promoter who talked about how important it was to get gamblers to believe in you, and he said Song Chai, Mr. Song Chai, is the one who told him no matter where you are in a fight, you go in round 5. Like, there was no dance-off in the Golden Age the way that there is now.
But please tell people who Wong Chinoy is.
Oh, Wong
There's lots of people who don't know.
Wong Chinoy is also in the Muay Thai Library. You can go watch 2 sessions with him. He's incredible. He fought everybody. The reason he was texting me is he was answering other questions I'd asked him. He had this incredible 4 years, was it? From 1989 to 1993 or something?
Well, no, it was only 1.5 years that I asked about. Maybe you expanded it.
He had these incredible, on his Wikipedia, he has these incredible string of fights against like the best of the best, and he's the best of the best. So this is like top dream fight matchups happening in these years, and it doesn't seem like enough fights. So we contacted him and we're like, who else did you fight during this time? And he's just spitting out like the greatest names ever, and he beat all of them except for one. He lost once, which is why he said he didn't become Fighter of the Year that year. But
who he is one of the best Muay Thai fighters who ever fought in the Golden Age, which was filled with the best fighters.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, we have to tell the people.
I felt like I said that. I said it's like dream matchup, and he's in there. It's like best of the best, like this. But Wong Chinoy was 4-time Lumpini champion.
I'm not sure.
It's amazing.
So, what can you tell me? You're a Muay Thai fighter who spent a lot of time trying to learn how to massage out, artfully win fights. one of the more interesting things you've said about Muay Thai scoring is there are so many ways to lose in Thailand.
Yeah.
Like things that you can't even imagine, like, oh, I just looked over at my corner in the 5th round, you just lost the fight.
Or that fight up in Royette that I didn't lose by weapons or points, but like my posture.
Yeah, your posture went down in the 4th round, and Karhat's like, all your weapons, you outscored her basically, but your posture lost you that fight.
Yeah.
But
Roop, if you follow me, I was talking about Roop.
well, what's Roop real
It's like
quick?
composure, like your actual visage and like your projection of confidence and composure and.
So we have a Muay Thai Bones where we talk about Roop. You can look that up.
And a technique vlog where we talk about Roop.
Yeah, totally. And maybe we can link that in a description. But what I want to ask you is, so one of the coolest things about fighting so much in Thailand is you learn all the nuances of how to lose. Like all the tiny things that can lose you a fight where otherwise you'd win. And you're absorbing the details of the culture, really. When you think about, oh, it's a game of poker, what additional thing does that bring to you as a fighter? Is there anything about the analogy of poker that makes you think, I've got to get better at this thing? Or does it add some perspective to what you already know quite a bit? Like, you know how to fight a fight in Thailand.
I think it just clarifies in a lot of ways how. I think that people who are experienced fighters already know, and even people who are inexperienced fighters but kind of geek out about fighting arts know that it's very psychological, they know it's very mental, they know that there's a like psyching your opponent out game. Ray Velez, who I took boxing from in America for a while before coming to Thailand, he is amazing. But he had this whole thing about like when he would go weigh in, he would act like a punk so that his opponent would think nothing of him.
You mean when he was a fighter?
Himself, yeah.
Oh.
He's like, I would go and act like a punk at weigh-in so that nobody would take me seriously, and then I'd fuck guys up in the ring. And it's like, I think people understand the psychology of fighting in that way, or like sandbagging for 2 rounds or whatever. But when you compare it to poker, where it's like, you're reading how your competition is responding to everything, you're reading how much they believe you, you're reading whether or not they're lying, like, do you have another gear? Like, there's a very Western thing that's like, I'm gonna go in a fight and do all the things I'm good at and kick someone's ass, and I have all the tricks and I have all the psychology. You have an opponent, they have all of those things too. Like, the whole thing about like making eye contact or not is it's dangerous, because what if they're better at it? Like, what if their eye contact fools you instead of like, this is the trick, you use eye contact to like psych out your opponent.
Okay.
You're susceptible to those things too. Like, you can be psyched out too. So comparing it to poker to me is this like, you have to not only have experience in how to bluff, but you have to have experience in recognizing tells and bluffs and things like this.
I remember this guy who was talking about, who didn't know Muay Thai very well. He's a UFC fan, and he was like, on the disputed Rotdang versus Gana fight decision where Rotdang won. But this guy was like, I was on Twitter and I was kind of like trying to explain to him that how you respond to a punch helps determine how big of a score that punch was.
Yeah.
And he was like, because he's Western or Western oriented, he was like, that's ridiculous. And he used the phrase, he goes, how you wear a strike actually affects the score.
And we're like,
And
yeah.
that phrase of wearing a strike
How you wear it.
is exactly it.
Yeah.
It's like, because it's a game of poker, it's like how you wear your hand. And I remember like this was like 250 fights ago or something, when what was her name? Nong Mam, who was low kicking the shit out of you early on, and you were like, if there's one more low kick, I'm dying.
Yeah.
And you had to just pretend like none of them hurt.
Yeah.
And you poker faced yourself to a win in that fight.
Yep.
And she had no idea. You were basically bluffing. You were like, I could take those kicks all day. And a low kick is not a super scoring strike in Muay Thai. You have to show effect on your opponent. You can't just land them and they're going to tally them up.
But we've also seen, and what I was talking about how like if you know that there's psychological games being played because you play them, you have to know that they play them too. We started learning a little while after that fight that if you low kick someone and they like nod at you, they like tap their leg and they're like kick there again, it probably actually hurt. Like any acknowledgement of it at all probably hurt.
Well, the judges don't count it as a hurt, but you as a fighter know.
Yeah, it's the psychological
You know
thing.
that if they're like, yeah, kick me again, you know either they're going to set you up for something, but they're also pretending that they could take 10 more of those and they could probably only take one more or two more.
The two examples, when Gauna elbowed Rotong and Rotong went fucking flying across the ring and there was no count and it became the whole like count or no count to win that fight. Rotong showed no agan is what they call it in Thai. He showed no effect from being elbowed across the ring. He got up and did this little like head shake that was like, that's nothing. So that's the like, I'm going to show that did nothing. I'm going to perform that did nothing, right? Which is the psychological game of that he probably felt that and he's acting like he didn't. Versus just now we watched Yodlek Pet fight against Seksan.
Okay.
Yodlek Pet low kicked Seksan so many times and Seksan's leg was showing symptoms. He was like his leg was starting to get really stiff, but he showed no effect. He didn't even block them. He didn't switch stance. He didn't do
lost
anything.
that fight though.
Both of them. But
I'm saying this, so he poker faced and it didn't work.
I'm saying there are two ways to go about psychologically responding to things. One is show zero response. The other is bluff. That's nothing. They're lying when they're like, hit me again, that was nothing. They're fucking lying. Or you can literally ignore it and then we're sitting there being like, do those hurt? Like, that must
It's
hurt.
weird though because they can go over the top too, where you're like smirking and everything. You get sometimes Westerners doing this. This isn't like become a clown about it either. There's a feeling to it.
No, I thought Rotong was actually clowning a little
Yeah,
bit.
I thought he was
overdoing
I
it.
thought he was overdoing it.
I'm just saying
too,
they're two different approaches.
Yeah. Well, so what I would say to wrap this topic up is when you watch a Muay Thai fight, continue scoring it as you normally do, which is probably just your feeling for the sport and some sense of scoring, like who's doing the most, getting the most strikes in, da-da-da-da. But I would say also ask yourself around round 4 into round 5, if this was a poker game, who had the better hand? Like, not who literally put their cards on the table and you count up the cards, but at this point in the fight, who has the better hand? And very often, whatever that feeling is, like who has the better hand, will be the winner.
Yeah.
Yeah. Pretty good. Next topic?
Next topic.
Okay, so his topic, oh man, what a fucking big, crazy topic. Because you're looking at me confused.
I'm not confused.
It touches on so many things about Thai culture and the realities of what one can experience as a fighter in Thailand. I don't know, I'm kind of excited to talk about this. Usually things I'm excited to talk about, Sylvie's like, I don't even want to do. Okay, but we'll enter it this way. Sylvie, it helps if you've been following Sylvie, but even if you're not, we're going to try to make this interesting to people who just come upon this. In Muay Thai culture, the fighters have a name. They usually have a fight name, like a blessed name, which would be something like translated something like Black Diamond or Victory Flag, right? And then their last name would be the name of the gym, generally. The gym in which raised them, trained them, supports them, that they have a contract with. These are Thai fighters. So the names of Muay Thai fighters do not correspond to the names of like Western fighters. Western
Right.
fighters have their name that they go.
There's no Joe Miller.
No. What's Joe Miller?
It's a name
But
of
there
a
is a
fighter in
Robert.
America.
Yeah. So that's the general template standard of what a Muay Thai fighter's name is. And then there's an additional layer to that where fighters would not take their gym name, but they'll take a sponsor's name.
Right.
So Long Swan Taxi Meter, right?
No, Samson taxi.
No,
meter.
they both were.
Oh, was he?
Yeah, I think they
Okay.
both were taxi
And that's
meter.
literally a metered taxi.
Well, a company must be
yeah,
right.
we were like, what did it mean? And they're like, it's a sponsor.
And Sangmani is now
Coffee.
Thai coffee.
Muay Thai coffee.
Muay Thai coffee. But Yotsun on 3K battery,
Mm-hmm.
right? So there's either you take the gym name or you take a sponsor name. So where we got to in Sylvie's fighting, we got to a political place and also a caring place where we're like, we need to separate ourselves from Patron Gym, which has been this long time, powerful family-like relationship you've had with the gym here in Pattaya, Pattaya where we're driving. And so I guess we'll enter it from this sideway in terms of the name. Because we kind of split off from Patron Rung for reasons we'll talk about, interesting reasons, it became also important not to fight with the Patron Rung name. So no longer Sylvie Patron Rung, and we had to come up with a new name. Part of the reason why you had to separate out from Patron Rung, became prudent or smart to do so, is that the things that you do as a fighter but also as a journalist are so far outside of the boundaries of what normal is in the world. Like, there's no one in the world who does what you do, but then in Thailand, which is a much more traditional hierarchical culture and subculture of Muay Thai, you really are breaking custom every week, like every day.
Yeah.
And you've been doing it for years and years and years. And Patron Rung...
And the more recognition and shine I get, the bigger of a problem that is.
Well, it's a double-edged sword, because Patron Rung has been an incredible gym, because they've let you be a norm breaker in so many ways for many years. Like, one of the reasons why we liked the gym is it's very sabai. But underneath that relaxation is a lot of tension that gets built up on the Thai side. And like, as you said, the more notoriety and shine you bring, the more attention gets brought to the power dynamics of, like, who's in charge of Sylvie.
Right.
And therefore, every time you break a norm in the things you do with filming the Muay Thai Library, which involves filming with legends and traveling and fighting way beyond what normal people fight, who's in charge of Sylvie becomes like the thing. And a large part of this is because you fight with the Patron Rung name. When you fight with someone's name, you represent them, they represent you. And so we got to a point where we're like, we have to make a change, because the kinds of training you need to do to get to Sylvie 3.0, and a lot of this came because of COVID, we were like, you're not going to be able to fight very much for the next year. We need to we're going to take a chance and radically change your training to involve like huge amounts of sparring, like things you'd spar way beyond any Thai would be like, this is normal or okay.
And because of all kinds of factors in who I am, my size, what I am, how much experience I have, how little experience in sparring I have, like, a lot of these made it difficult. It's not okay, Sylvie's just going to spar every day at the gym in a normal way. We had to finagle
it's not only that, there's no Thai in Thailand who spars as much as you do.
Right, but what I'm saying is that this could not be accommodated in a normal way at the gym, and so we're working with Yod Kumpan, like bringing Yod Kumpan in.
Well, I guess that's really where a large part of the tension came about, is because COVID made us aware, like, let's just devote this time for the next year to just rebuilding you as a fighter, which means breaking from the typical ways that you've trained over the last 6 years.
Yeah.
Because the last 6 years made you a certain way.
Yeah.
And it made you a very good, successful fighter. But you want to get to Yod Muay level, to a complete whole nother level, right? Right? Which involved really radically changing up your training patterns. And to do that inside the gym, which is a family-run traditional gym, was just producing tremendous friction.
Yeah.
And it's understandable friction because things are done a certain way. And you used to be like fucking balls to the walls, do all the training that was assigned to you. Like you were a very obedient student in those walls.
Yeah, I'm still that way. I do all the training.
Yeah, but you know what I'm saying.
Yeah.
There was a change that happened, right?
Yeah.
Do you want to jump in on this?
No. You're saying that I had to take more of a direct, like I'm directing what I'm doing now.
Yeah, and it was after 6 years of having a particular kind of relationship. And I think a lot of it also, there was a little bit of a problem, is that because of COVID, there was nobody in the gym, or very few people in the gym.
Right.
And so when there's so few people, if the gym is just a bustling gym, just full of intensity and people and personalities, little Sylvie doing her own weird thing in the corner doesn't matter at all. But when the gym becomes empty and there's 3 people training and one's being fucking weird and wanting to do all these other things, it produces a necessary friction. And so we basically, first we removed ourselves from the gym completely. We're like, this is just causing conflict. And now, you basically constructed a training regimen that was completely new, right? So maybe let's talk about that a little bit. This is mostly me talking, so this has been a very long intro to a conversation.
This is a very painful subject for me, so this is a difficult one for me. That
I know, baby.
Kevin gets excited about the ones that I don't like talking about.
I know, that makes the best stuff because people don't talk about this stuff.
Yeah.
Like nobody talks about this stuff.
Yeah.
Everybody's very close-lipped, you know.
Yeah. So I don't know, what are you asking me? How did I piece together my training when we were not at Petron?
Well, that was one of the things that happened, was we're going to Sylvie 3.0, and we're like, it's causing too much friction at the gym, the traditional gym. So we're removing ourselves from Petron Rung, and we're just gonna like build it from the ground up.
Yep.
So what was that about? What was that like? Do you not want to talk about it?
No, you just have to ask me more direct questions because I don't know what you're at. What we did.
I feel like if I ask you a question, you're going to give a very short answer, and then I have to ask you another question.
Well, try it instead of.
No, I want you to take the lead on this. I've been talking for 20 minutes. Why don't you just talk about why it's painful for you? Why it was painful, because that's what's most important to you, and that will lead to other stuff. Because I'm more interested in what you've done to piece your training together, but you might not be.
If that's what you're interested in, that's what we'll talk about. So, there's like a routine, like a daily routine of training when you're part of a gym, which is what I was doing day in and day out for 6 years. I've always been the like super hard worker at the gym, always doing everything that was asked of me, and then my other stuff on top of it. It's like take care of the things that are expected of you and then do the things that I need to do. So when you're pulled out of that routine, it's very tricky to piece it, like Frankenstein it back together in pieces. But what was weird about it is I had forgotten that from when I even first started, it's kind of always been like that. Like when we were in New York, it was training with Master K, going into Brooklyn for sparring, like all of this different stuff that we've kind of always done.
We've always pieced training together into little pieces.
Yeah.
And it's not easy to do this in Thailand. We even did it at Lana, but we didn't go to other gyms.
Yeah, we did it within the walls.
But we
of
did it
Lana.
within the gym. The rain. You might be hearing rain on the roof again. But at Lana, when we were at Lana for the first 2 years, you were having your training, and we're like, this is not sufficient. So we started taking private lessons with Nung, with Big Nung, who is a international champion boxer, and it produced tension within the gym to be suddenly he was a low status trainer, even though he was an amazing teacher, but he had, for particular reasons, he had low status in the gym, and suddenly we were paying for privates with this low status guy while your real trainer was somebody else who was handling you, and it was producing tensions within that gym too.
Yep.
So we've always tried to kind of like walk this line of respect.
Right.
And the way that we kind of...
This is not uniquely Thai. We had this in America too.
Yeah.
Where like, because I didn't belong to anybody, I was Master K's student, but I would go to these other places to get sparring or, different experience. Master K was like, learn from everybody, like take from everybody. He was very open to it.
Yeah.
But the moment I like entered into a gym and okay, you can put your bag here, you belong to me, and now I'm going and piecing my stuff together, suddenly it's like, you can't do that. So it's very difficult to belong to a place and do what I do, regardless of where we are in the world. This is not a uniquely Thai thing.
Which was painful for you because you always had that feeling you wanted to belong to a place.
I do want, this is why it's very painful, is that I do want to belong, and I'm also an incredibly loyal, respectful person.
Yeah.
So I'm gonna cry, to give as much respect as I can and then be told I'm being disrespectful. So be who you are or shut it down to be respectful is an incredibly painful spot to be standing in.
And I'll say that's not the first time that you've kind of been like put into the shut it down to be respectful. Remember, Krunat was like, don't train this summer.
Yeah.
Remember? It's interesting.
No, I didn't forget that.
Well, I don't know. You're not responding. Maybe I can't read your mind.
Yes,
I'm
this
saying,
has happened to me many times.
I'm saying there are times where crews feel like respect is established by shutting it down.
Yeah.
And you're not a shut it down person.
Yeah,
no, not really.
To me, what's really difficult about it is that my sense of justice is one in which everything is weighed case by case. Like, you look at the circumstances of something. To me, there is something very difficult about nothing you personally are doing is actually disrespectful, but as a unit, as a thing, when you like blur your eyes about it and it's not you and it's not the particular situation, it's just this like, people don't do this, so that's disrespectful, that pisses me off. Like, to me, I know people who on the like blurred out stand back and don't look directly at it. They're very problematic people, or like they're very on the outside of society or groups or whatever, but they're incredibly loyal, dependable people. And I'm like, that's a good person. They have low status in the like group, and so people are like, swing them to the side. I'm like, but you can depend on that person. They have nothing. Yeah. And yet you can depend on them. To me, that means more than they fit in this category or that category.
Yeah.
I'm
going to also say, part of the reason why you've had to be a Ronin, you wrote a beautiful article about this, I don't know, maybe 6 years ago, when you were fighting everywhere and not representing anybody. We'd like show up in a festival fight and who do you represent? What's your name? It was only recent, in the last maybe year and a half, that Petrarung got attached to you in a meaningful way. For a long time, you kind of were nameless, even though you had the Petrarung name. You were not like creating a footprint on the fight culture where what your name was mattered.
Right.
And you kind of were more like a nameless fighter. And so one of the interesting things about why you have to be this way is, one, you have very high aspirations in terms of like wanting to be Yod Moy level, like to really be we'll talk about it later, a magical fighter. like the fighters you adore of the Golden Age, like Karahad or Diesel Noi.
Right.
And you're a woman, and there are no paths. Like, there are no paths to Yodmoy as a female fighter. They do not exist. There are some paths to go getting a world championship belt as a female fighter. Like, historically, you can go train at Khao Samrit Gym for a year and you'll probably win a world title. Or Santai.
Right.
Like, well-connected gyms, train you with great technique, give you great training, can set up a world title for you, and world titles come out of those gyms.
Right.
But that's not what you were after as a female fighter. There's no pathway. So in Thailand especially, where things are much more there is a kind of laissez-faire, sabai thing, but underneath that there's a lot of rigidity in the culture and traditions and customs. Are you okay?
Yeah, I'm trying to charge your tablet.
Oh. It necessarily requires straining the paths that are available to you.
Right.
If you want to go there, you have to walk off the path, or you have to walk this path and then hop onto this path and then to that path. And that's kind of what we've done. And it feels like to me that female fighters in Thailand, like Westerners, who are pretty damn serious, have taken your lead on this, but also run into great stress.
Yeah.
Like, I know Maggie was trying to put her in Chiang Mai, was running into limits in her training, was trying to supplement her training privately with other coaches, people that you had trained with. I remember other fighters trying to piece together opportunities, changing gyms. Like, as a female fighter in Thailand, if you have a very high aspiration, it's really kind of impossible to stay on a single road.
Yeah, this is a big difference between male opportunity and female inopportunity. Is that as a male fighter, when you come to Thailand and you find a gym that has the right connections, that can put you on the shows you want to be on, and you just kind of slide into the slot, you can basically just get put onto the slide, and the slide goes to where you want it to go.
I mean, for some fighters.
Yeah.
It's not every male fighter, but some fighters.
No, but you can find
there's
a gym
some gyms that
produce
Lupini champions, for instance.
Yeah. But if you're a male and you're at a gym and you're not getting the opportunities that you want, you can change to another gym that maybe gets you the opportunities you want. As a female fighter, that doesn't really happen. You kind of always have to piece together from several other places, and it's way more offensive, I think, as a female to do that. There are men...
Really? You think so?
There are Western men who I see on social media who hop between 3 or 4 gyms, kind of on a slow rotation. I don't know what their experience is with their gyms, if they're offending people or whatever the thing is. As long as they're not we put our name on you and we represent you and you have to be our fighter, I don't think it's that big of a deal. But either the female fighter will be passed off as we have nothing to do with you, you just train here and you train there also. But I think that it's very hard because we don't have pathways that are slots that are okay, you come to this gym and then you fight on these shows and you have this.
See, I agree and disagree about this flexibility. I think because you're a female fighter, you've been allowed, to a certain degree, way more freedom than some males might.
If
because
6 years
women
ago
don't
I was a
matter.
male and came to Petron and was I'm going to book my own fights, that would not have happened.
No,
As
but
a
they
woman,
were
it was
oh,
okay.
you're a female, no problem. It doesn't, no skin off of my nose.
Well, it's also, Pinu doesn't have connections to female promoters, so it was yeah, you go do that, I don't know.
Yeah, but even if he did, I think being a woman has allowed, because female fighters are not that important in traditional Muay Thai, there is a degree of freedom because you're not significant. But then if you become significant, there is another thing that kicks in, which is who's controlling this woman.
Yeah, I'm not doing things differently from I did 6 years ago or in the past 6 years, but now it's a problem.
Now
wasn't
it's a thing,
for
yeah,
a long
which
time.
I think has a gendered dimension. This kind of like wild rice thing. You know what I mean?
I do. Yeah.
And so our solution is to kind of like separate out, actually to spare other people from the burden of responsibility and reputation in a certain regard.
As much as
Like as much as you can. For us, it's always this kind of like baby bear. It's like you want to be not too hot, not too cold. If you get too close to a gym and you bring too much attention and there's too much success, then suddenly all the questions of responsibility go to the gym.
Yeah.
And everything becomes more constrained in a very interesting way.
Well, there's this.
Oh, there's a beautiful fucking storm cloud ahead.
Yeah,
of
we're
us.
like driving into a black.
Blind, totally.
What just happened is a really good example.
I agree.
So, Hippie set up this fight for me in the South, which is what we're driving back home from.
Who's Hippie?
Hippie Singmani was a fighter in the Golden Age. If you ask Karahat who was the best, he's like Hippie was number one. He was 105 pounds and fought everybody. He fought up a lot, and he fought people on their way up. Like Hippie was amazing. He's one of the few people I've ever met in my life who is unreal in terms of how confident he is, and yet you agree 100%. You're like, yes, you should be that confident. Like, you are exactly what you think and say you are. He's incredible. He's in the Muay Thai Library. You can watch him there. He has a gym, Town in Town in Bangkok. You can train with him there. Comes down to the south.
So he's a legend of the sport, and he's never dealt with you as a fighter. You've trained with him and filmed with him, but we, out of the blue, because he's connected to people in the South, he's famous in the South, and we saw a card was happening in the South. We're like,
an
hey,
all-female card.
we're like, hey, Hippie, can you get me on this? You never asked anything of him like this, really, and he just whipped it up for you. And I'm like, and so that's the lead into what happened when we went there.
Yeah. So Hippie is the connection that got me this fight, and he was there. So his friends cornered for me, and he was there kind of, I don't know, protecting me, representing me, like as we were there kind of thing. But here's my point about this, is that I've known Hippie for 4 years, maybe?
Yeah, maybe more, yeah.
He likes me, I like him, we've met a number of times, we communicate back and forth.
We support him, we send him money from the crew fund every year. Like, he's proud of the work you do.
He recently contacted us to see if we could help him publish a book he wrote about himself, which we're looking into, whether we can maybe help get it translated and things like this. But this is a very, like, Hippie has a connection that really benefited me because he could get me this fight. I really represented him well, I fought well, I did well down there, and so it's like good for Hippie, good for me. Like, we're basically like working well together. This works brilliantly in a like one-off, two-off, like just kind of like we come be superstars together. If I suddenly started representing Hippie in a like fighting with his name, training at his gym, all of these things, all of that wonderfulness would go away. Like, it would immediately
it would turn into something else. There still might be great opportunities, but then suddenly face becomes a very important thing.
Yeah.
So, but tell the story that he was joking about Dieselnoy. It just shows you that even in this one instance, representing him is actually a thing. Like, you are here representing me.
Hippie is kind of incredible in that, like, when he trains me, like when we work with him for the Muay Thai Library, he's been thinking about what I'm like. Like, he's seen my fights on video, and he's like, this is what Sylvie's lacking, this is what you need to work on. And they're not like, you need to add elbows. He's like, you need to add kill shots. Like, he totally sees it as this, like, how to create a
You're missing this ingredient.
strategy
Yeah, yeah.
persona. He's brilliant. He actually came to Petrungrung when Diesel Noy was a guest there. He's like, I'm gonna be in Patti, I'm gonna come see you. And he came to see me, and he couldn't help himself. He just like threw himself into training, which was so cool. It's free on YouTube this day of Hippie coming to
I think we've
Petrungrung.
like 45 minutes or so.
I think it's an hour about. But he's showing me like how to like, you do this and then you have the kill shot and blah blah blah. This is like Hippie's character that
His
he's
style.
trying to like teach.
Yeah.
So I go and I fight. I'm a Muay Thai fighter. He knows I'm a Muay Thai fighter. He got me a fight at my actual weight. It's been years since I've fought at my actual weight, and him watching me live, he sees why I don't fight at my natural weight very much.
Well, this is as a small side note, people have tried to get Sylvie to fight at her, who don't know her well, try to get her to fight at her own weight, but it's kind of not fair for her to fight at her own weight because she's so strong. But Hippie was notoriously too small for everyone.
He was so
Like,
small.
he was so tiny that he'd have to fight up, and he lost a lot of fights that he took a weight disadvantage. So when he sees Sylvie, he's like, oh, I need to get her a proper matchup, because I never had proper matchups.
Right.
So it's a weird thing. You're like this too small fighter. You are representing him in more ways than one.
Right.
Like, you are like him to him.
Totally.
He's like, I'm going to make you a fair matchup.
He's the 105-pound legend of the South, and I'm like fighting at 95 pounds. It's like even tinier.
If you're listening on the podcast, this is rain pounding on our roof. I hope it's still, the audio is audible.
If the audio gets too much, I'm going to get Mickey Mouse voice doing my, like, when I try to talk loud, my voice gets really high. Anyway, so when I came out of the fight, I won by knockout in round 2. When I came out, Hippie was telling me that I need to, like, have better focus at looking at what people's weaknesses are and their patterns are, and then punishing them for this. And then he jokingly, but a little bit serious, kind of like swatted me, and he was like, I brought you down here, like, you came down as Hippie's representation, and then you go and knock her out like Diesel Noy. Like, you fought like Diesel Noy, but I'm the one who brought you down here. Like, I was representing the wrong legend.
It's not only was it humorous and awesome to hear that, but there's a seed of actual truth there.
There is.
There is a little tiny thing, which is why are you representing the other legend who he knows you have connections to?
Yep.
And he's like, I bring you to the South where I'm the Prince of the South.
Yeah.
Why are you not fighting like me? Sylvie doesn't fight like him, but he's like, just do one little snappy leg kick, little nasty leg kick, just to put a little hippie sauce on it, on the fight, right?
Yeah.
And it just shows you, like, this is a beautiful, like, when we're talking about traditional, customary Thai things and having to break norms, it's not all bad. There's something very beautiful about that, where Hippie's like, put a little bit of me in there because I brought you.
But there's also, like, this really beautiful part of actual representation, which is very real, which is like my fight before this one, I had Karahat in my corner.
Yeah.
And the announcer on TV was laughing. He's like, Karahat is Timur and his student is Muay Thai. Like, they're not the same.
More than Muay Thai.
And it was like, why aren't they the same? And the thing is, you might not be like your trainer or your whatever, but like if you come from a lineage, you'll have like a piece of it.
A flavor.
Like if you're from Ramba's gym, those little kids from Ramba, you might not be like a low kicking, punching, stinging fighter the way Ramba was, but you will be fucking hard. Like his fighters are so hard, you're like, that's Ban Ramba. Like, you know what that is.
Yeah. Or
and that's
Arjan
the kind
Sarat.
of like,
It's
like,
the sauce.
The thing with Ajahn Sarat is that his fighters don't fight with his gym name. None of them have the Sarat
But
name.
everybody
They come
knows.
from somewhere else, but you're like, I know where they train.
Yeah, everybody knows
And
who.
like
where,
the Giat Kam Torn,
right.
we're like, you know that's a Giat Kam Torn fighter. Like they're all kind of knee fighters. They're not the same kind of knee fighter, but you're like, I know that they train.
Yeah.
at that
So
gym.
it's that sauce that is involved with what representation is.
Yeah.
And that was That was part of the difficulty or the problem of being too closely connected to a traditional family gym, is that Sylvie is building a sauce with all the crews, like all the legends. She's filmed not only because of the documentary, but she's always taken so many influences, and this is really kind of against the nature of Thai culture. It's really being outside of what a fighter is, right?
Yeah.
You look at me, you look like you're not listening to me.
I am listening
or
to
you
you.
don't agree with me.
It's not only Thailand, but it is very strongly Thailand.
Yeah,
And
that's
when
good to
you're-
point out.
When you're Farang, you kind of have to like overemphasize.
Well,
like you have to do more than.
It's again, there's two different things. One is you're a Farang, so Thais are like, that's a crazy Farang.
Right.
And they're forgiving of it there's a certain freedom that Farang have where they break rules because they're Farang and they don't understand or they don't care or they're foolish or whatever. But then in another regard, because you're Farang, you have to over dramatize the respect and the obedience paid
Yeah,
to
it's
make
like-
up for what Farang are.
It's like when
in the
people
culture.
convert to a religion, they're the most hardcore. Like,
Totally. Yeah, so this is this is so interesting to me because part of it is there's no pathway for female fighters to get to Yod Muay level. You have to make it. You have to create a recipe, and that recipe is going to violate the norms. Like you're talking about with Hippie. We'd like to keep fighting for him down in the South, and we probably will, but we also have to be very careful of how closely aligned you are with him, because then name becomes at risk, like face comes at risk. And what we've always done is create these attitudes towards people where we're just like, let's put ourselves in a relationship where we pay a lot of respect and we bring a lot of shine and a lot of good to the relationship. Like you win fights or bring customers, all these things. But we also are kind of like always trying to make sure that we don't over connect to any one name,
yeah.
because it just causes problems within the culture.
Right.
It's really not even that the person, let's say the head of the gym or whatever, like Hippie, would object, but it's what other people say.
Yeah.
Like Thais are very gossipy, sensitive to gossip, and everybody has enemies. So if you have a successful fighter, there's people talking shit about that fighter
Right.
all the time.
Right.
And so it puts pressure on whoever is the sponsor in a certain regard.
Yeah, I want to be very careful to point out that this is not like, oh, Sylvie, you're in such an unfair situation, like you only do good, you're whatever, blah, blah, blah. Like, no, it's completely understandable and real that the bigger I get, the more recognition I get, the more people there are being like, I taught Sylvie, I'm connected to Sylvie. Like, yes, it's win-win-win for everybody.
Yeah.
But I do have a home. I do have the Petron Room. I had the Petron Room name. I had like this kind of like, there's skin in the game for this one spot, and there's not a lot of skin in the game for all these other people who can just benefit on it.
I mean, there's also character traits. Like one of the reasons why I am particularly indebted to Karahat is that Karahat is a very famous fighter.
Yeah.
Like a very famous name. And he took you on as a student. I think he went to your corner. I think you lost 8 fights in a row. You're winning everywhere else.
Yeah.
Like, you always win about 80% of your fights.
Yep.
Every fight, 8 in a row, Karahat was in your corner. Fucking people on the loudspeaker are like, Karahat! Like, they're it's not like he secretly was in your corner.
Him in a long time,
yeah,
and there he
people
is.
coming to like take pictures with him.
Yeah.
And you lost 8 fights in a row. I'll guarantee you. Do I go over here, baby?
Yeah,
Actually,
it looks that way. It's a big bright light with an arrow. Looks like it's for you.
Yeah, there's also a straight thing. You have the map here.
I don't have it on.
Can you check for me?
You're talking about Karahat.
1 second. We're checking the directions.
Go straight.
Okay, good. It is perfectly normal, acceptable, good ties, like good trainers, good crews. After 4 or 5 fights in a row of you losing, they want to distance themselves. Even after 2, they lose face. But it's just a matter of the nature of the culture. And there was something about Karahat where he is like, I am not touched by this.
Yeah.
Like, I'm not diminished by you losing. And he just kept training you when we could, and he would represent you in the corner, and he was just like, he had a very patient belief in you that for me, I am like so indebted to him because of him extending himself in that way, which is really beyond what normal good Thai people do.
Yeah. We have to change the battery on this one, but we also have to actually talk about my name change.
Okay,
We haven't done yet.
Okay, let's change the battery.
Oh, it just went up. Down. Where
I don't know
are the unused batteries?
we don't have any. We have to buy some.
Oh,
But is the battery out?
no. But it's
Is
at
it-
1.
Maybe I'm in the middle of a storm, so you got to do the looking. What's happening?
It's at 1, so we need to change this battery. But let's just finish this segment and talk about my name change, and then we'll switch.
Okay.
So, in order to kind of mitigate this...
Oh, this has been such a long introduction.
been a long introduction.
This is what you have to understand so much about Thai culture to understand this, right?
Yeah.
Right? So when we're like we're not going to fight with Pecharung anymore, basically to take pressure off the relationship, and so you could eventually go back and train there in a very like every other day, once in the every afternoon, every other day.
But you also don't want to just hitch yourself to another problematic situation by taking a different name. So we decided to...
Well, we thought about other names that we were going to hitch ourselves to,
Right.
right? And we were like, no matter what name we take, it becomes problematic.
Right.
It will strain the relationship because of how you train, because of how you fight, because of what you do in the Muay Thai Library, and the shine that's coming to you. It will problemize almost every relationship.
Right.
And so, go ahead, baby. I'm sorry, I got distracted.
You got distracted from what you were saying?
Yes, from what I was
So we decided instead of like taking a name that's honoring, we thought about using like a name that would honor Diesel Noy or something like that, but we decided to avoid all of that. We'll just take something that I've actually been kind of like working, go to this gas station. Kemical X is this kind of concept of like...
Okay, let's leave it here. We'll continue.
Okay.
Okay.
So finishing up the name change thing.
Well, I want to do more than finish up. I want to talk about it a little
Okay,
bit.
go for it.
It's a very interesting time to be changing your name. But it was kind of like, it came out of this entire commitment to 3.0, Sylvie 3.0, just to literally become a different fighter, right? You had like a really defined Muay Thai persona, fight silhouette, and it took you to a certain point, and then we're just our commitment to different kinds of training. Oh, we didn't even go into the creating this new kind of training. Maybe we should talk about that too. Actually ended up producing a name change. Like, it's not a small thing to change your name, your fight name.
It's actually really difficult because people know me as Sylvie Petrungrung, so even if we tell people this other name, they're like, we know who this is, and they just do whatever
the
they
want.
Petrungrung name. But we've suspected, and I guess we're going to find out, that telling people that Kemical X is a sponsor might ensure that change more.
Right. So Chemical X, Sylvie Chemical X, is the name we chose, and we chose it for a couple of reasons. One is we had already started the Chemical X Awards, which is a promotional thing happening through the support of our patrons, where we're actually, this is before COVID, where we were building a fight promotion in Chiang Mai that was designed to lift up the Thai female fighters, the Thai female fight scene, and basically encourage more dynamic, higher skilled competition with Thai female fighters versus Thai female fighters. It was
financial bonus.
Adding bonuses. Low Blow got involved in it, who's an official sponsor of yours, got involved with this promotion. But the Chemical X Award, we've already fought that promotion once. We created it once, and then we gave the Chemical X Award out, and we want to continue this Chemical X promotion project. And we have an angel investor who's very interested in supporting it financially. So in a weird way, Chemical X is the sponsor of you as a fighter.
Right.
Like, just like how Long Swan or Samson would be taximeter, Samson taximeter, Sylvie Chemical X, but you're your own sponsor.
Yeah.
In a weird way.
Yeah.
Right? But you have that also where you have like so-and-so Pet Yindi on the Pet Yindi show.
Right.
Right?
Where they're the promoter and the gym. Yeah.
Exactly, in a weird way. So there is a Thai tradition or custom by which being Sylvie Chemical X is not totally bizarre.
Right.
And these sponsor names are kind of odd in a weird way.
They can be.
Yeah.
Like the coffee, the ZC coffee is pretty weird, or like Muay Thai coffee is pretty
or
weird.
what was his name? Hong's, the pork place?
I can't, that would take too long to explain. This woman who I fought many times, who I actually really like, had the most ridiculous sponsor / fight name only for this one card, and it
Yeah, but what I'm saying is that a sponsor's name is jarring in a weird way.
yeah.
So it's comprehensible.
Yeah.
And then the other reason why Chemical X, maybe you can talk about that, is not just that we were already doing a promotional series with Chemical X, but what does Chemical X mean? We didn't just make up a name.
I'm not sure how to talk about this because you wanted to downplay.
Yeah, I don't.
connection.
Well, yeah, I'm including not talking about it.
You're what?
Yeah, let's talk about the positive parts of it.
Well, if you're familiar with the Chemical X of Powerpuff Girls, it takes that rhyme that girls are sugar and spice and everything nice, but then you knock over the bottle of Chemical X, which is this like secret ingredient, and create these like super powered little girls, which is incredible, which is kind of what we're going for, is this like secret ingredient to like,
Yeah,
in Thai they say cheat is to inject, like a injection of medicine or something like this. When gamblers cheat a fighter in the ring, they're like, I will give you 5,000 baht if you knock this guy out in this round, kind of thing. It's just like you inject this kind of
like
element,
a boost or
incentive
something.
kind of thing, is that we're trying to like inject something into the Thai female fight scene in terms of opportunities and things like that. So it's fitting in that Chemical X way.
And it's the question of what is Chemical X is really interesting for female fighters. It's like, what is the thing, the secret ingredient, that if you add it to the paths of female fighting, like what's available to them, if they just had Chemical X, what would be possible?
Right.
And I think that's really in the spirit of what we're talking about,
Yeah.
is Sylvie Chemical X.
Yes. It also has X for like the X chromosome, which is great. But Kevin doesn't like time stamping things in like that won't be relevant or will only be relevant in this time. But I just want to mention that because we're just coming from this all-female fight card, which are rare, and it was very cool because it was Southern women from 14 different provinces fighting each other, and there were like 4 southern weight class belts going out that night. It's very rare to have a female fight card that they just had 2 male fights stuck in, which is totally the opposite of how it normally goes, which is like a fight card is all men and then maybe you have 1 or 2 female bouts in there. And so this like contrast of male-female fighting is always kind of like
well, so
wonky.
it literally was not an all-female fight card, but it was billed as an all-female fight card.
Right. Like the men didn't matter, kind of. What was really funny about it is that like, so we went to a college that was like 75% women.
Right.
It used to be an all-female college, and then they started letting men in the 70s, I think.
Is it a secret?
Sarah Lawrence. But what was interesting for me is that when you reverse that, when it's mostly women and then you have maybe like 1 man in a class or something, the dynamics completely shift, where all of a sudden the male is really insecure about raising his hand or talking or whatever the thing is.
And
college.
It's
not a like, hooray, men should be embarrassed kind of thing. That's not what I'm talking about. It's that when you shift the like population like that, the way you compare things changes. So if you have a mostly male fight card with 2 female bouts on it, you're comparing the women to the men and you're like not the same. You judge it in a certain way. When it's all women and then you have 2 male cards, you're also comparing them, but you're like comparing it in a completely different way. And what was incredible was that the male fights were so boring and like duds that the crowd got really quiet like during their fights, which was this contrast of like normally when it's mostly male and then you have 2 female fight cards, you see how hard female fighters fight, especially in like Isan, and we were seeing it in the South. We hadn't really seen that before, so we didn't know. But like,
such power.
Girls fight fucking hard, and it's not like the skill can be all over the place.
It's not
but
beast mode. It's just the intensity of focus and commitment is very evident. Fight after fight, especially on this card.
Yes.
Maybe these were top girls in their weight division.
And the referees let it go. Like, it was really exciting. And then the men got in and they're like, I'm going to use my technique. Like, whatever. And it's like, just not the same. But that, to me, there was something about this, like, when you see the dominant part of female fights and then this kind of minor, and we'll put in some comparison male fights, is like this, the Kemical X of female fighters, young female fighters, when they're just fucking like going for it. That to me was a element of Kemical X.
You're saying the community or the
female fighters who people know in the West, like Loma, Petjija, Sao Sing, Green. Fighters like this came out of fight scenes that were like young girls fighting fucking hard in like province fights. That's where it comes from. At a certain age, they kind of maybe move into more of a like femur, like nobody will fight me, now it's all Durpan, like all these different things happen, but they grew out of what we were watching in that female fight card. That's what made them what they are, which is really cool. We want to grow that. We don't want to like change that. We want to like
grow it, and that's part of what the Kemical X promotion ideas are. We're putting on all female cards, but also I think also the Kemical X goes back to your philosophy, which is fight a lot. Just create volumes of experience and keep fighting up, challenging yourself. That the Kemical X that's missing for female fighters is women just do not have the same challenges regularly put upon them to allow them to reach their potential. And so hopefully this Kemical X times Sylvie Kemical X, this rename, is about that kind of thing too. Like the promotion we're thinking about, but really it's mostly about you. And as we described at length, trying to create a political in-between spot where we're not impacting somebody by putting their name on you, and retaining as much freedom as possible to do as much good as possible as you move around between fight opportunities, training opportunities.
Just keep it better for everybody.
I think so, Okay. So next topic. Oh my goodness. they just keep on coming.
Kevin's really excited about this one.
Baby,
I'm not.
all of our topics are incredible.
I'm not afraid to talk about this one. I'm excited about this one too, actually, because it's
Oh,
crazy.
we didn't even get to talk about your training regimen. I guess we'll do that in another Muay Thai Bones or later.
Well, Kevin made a video that's on YouTube that shows, like 40 minutes of a day in training with me that you can go see?
Nope.
No?
Nope.
How long is that?
Not a day in training. You train in 3 places.
Yeah, I know, but it's a piece of.
No, yeah, whatever. That's not what we need to talk about.
Okay.
We don't need to talk about Yokum. We've already talked about 3.0 in sparring, but it's about piecing together, how you piece together. We'll do this another time, but how you piece together training after you left the traditional gym and are still working to create a constellation of a recipe. But this topic coming up, this is something I've never heard anyone talk about at length or in substance about female fighting. No, none.
No.
And it's huge, like potentially very huge.
Yeah.
We're gonna let you take this lead on this.
I have to lead this in?
You can do such a good job. Do you want me to do it?
You do it, for sure.
For sure. Okay. I'm always bouncing around the internet looking at articles, interesting science articles. I don't even know how I came upon this idea.
Kevin Googled, why is my wife crazy?
No, I did not Google that. I know why you're crazy. Oh, okay. So it occurred to me, I don't know, I read a study somewhere. I came upon a study which said that hormonal patterns within the menstrual cycle have powerfully different effects on the amygdala in the brain. And basically, if you don't know, there's 2 prominent peaks of hormone. It's more complicated than that, but there's 2 prominent peaks in 2 phases of the menstrual cycle. There's the follicular phase, which is around day 8 to 15 or something like that, 10 to 13. The mid-follicular phase, and there's the luteal phase, which is like around day 20 to 23 or something like that. So when your estrogen peaks in the follicular phase, it has a certain impact on the biochemistry of the brain, and when it peaks in the luteal phase, it has a different impact. What I was really interested in was how the amygdala is affected when your hormones, when estrogen is peaking, or progesterone?
Mm-hmm.
The reason why it's so interesting as fighters is that the amygdala is the fear center of the brain. Like, it has many other functions, but it's an older part of the brain, and it regulates fear responses and also the encoding of fear memories, like powerful memories driven by fear. And the amygdala is divided into 2 hemispheres. So we're not going to get all sciencey on this. I have a thread on the Muay Thai forum, on the Muay Thai Roundtable forum, where we'll link to that, where you can discuss it and look at the studies that I've created, like a stream of a thread of linked studies. But the amygdala hemispheres are affected differently for women on different parts of their cycle. So the left hemisphere is intensified during the luteal phase, and the right hemisphere during the follicular phase. Why this is so interesting and important is the brain is responding very, very differently at different times in the month to things like pain or fear. Which means there's actually, I don't think we have it linked up there. There's a graphic here, which actually means that when you're anticipating pain, or experiencing pain, or remembering pain that just happened, the brain, the female brain, I don't know what the politically correct, the more inclusive term is, but the female brain will process those events very differently at different times of the month, which means to me that you are kind of a different person on, let's say, day 12 of your cycle or day 22. Like, literally different circuits are going off in different parts of your brain when you're experiencing fear or pain. And the reason why this is so important and interesting, and I'm really excited about you jumping in on this because you're the one who experiences it, is that one of the most difficult things a fighter has, especially a female fighter, is female fighters are always trying to justify that they're real fighters, that because they're categorically excluded from being fighters. It's coded as male. So you are constantly trying to like live up to and overperform. One of the most difficult things for a female fighter is comparison. Not only are you comparing yourself to others, like other women or other men, but most damagingly, you compare yourself to yourself. You're like, last week I could do this. I can't do this anymore. I'm shit. I'm regressing. And I'm like, if you're a different person, if you're responding differently to fear or pain 1 week apart, and you start comparing yourself to yourself, you will be in crazy land. You're like, what the fuck is wrong with me? Ooh, buffalo.
Buffalo on the road.
Oh, so he's got a beautiful chain or necklace of some kind. Yeah. So maybe this is the point where you jump in, where we talk about maybe you're more than one person, you're two different people, and that you're training for two different kinds of people, and this comparing yourself to yourself, like, I don't know, baby, I feel like I'm like the man-splaining. Like,
okay, Kevin being someone who does not menstruate, being this excited about it is cool, so I'm glad you did that intro. But here's my intro.
Okay, good. Drop the mic.
Okay. For people who menstruate, in America, I don't know, I wasn't raised anywhere else. In America, in Colorado, I actually had pretty decent health education. It's still complete shit. I've been menstruating for more than 20 years, like 11 per year. That means that for more than 200 menstrual cycles, you'd think I'd have a fucking idea how things go. I'm surprised every single time. I'm like, why am I like this? Like, is it always like this? Does it always hurt? Why am I wanting things that are salty? Like, I don't fucking understand. And like, culturally we make jokes about things. So like, oh, I crave chocolate. I want to eat everything. I'm so grumpy. PMS, like pain. It's different for everybody. Everybody experiences these things differently, but to itself, you have a pattern. We are so shitty at talking about, in this case, this is women's bodies. Yes, it's people who menstruate, but patriarchy hates women, so we never talk about fucking female issues. So female health is never fucking like, this is something you should pay attention to, this is something that you should learn about, this is something you should actually find important about yourself and make adjustments to. Instead, it's like, never make an adjustment. There's something wrong with you if you can't go to work when you're like, just, suck it up and be tough kind of thing. Like, it's different for everybody. What was crazy for me, I have 3 older brothers. I'm the only person, I'm the only daughter in my family. My mom is pretty open about talking about, menstruation and things like this, but unfortunately in such a way that it made me so uncomfortable that I never fucking got into it. Like, I had no sharing of experiences with other people. Like, I definitely internalized the this is a thing you do not.
Cranes, baby.
This is a thing you do not let anyone in your family know is happening to you. You smuggle the pad into the bathroom at school. Totally. Hand in the air, this is my experience of being someone who menstruates my entire life. In learning to track it, one, just to even know when it's coming. Like, it took me
Wait,
15...
You're jumping to tracking. Like, what are you talking about?
Because what we're talking about is tracking your cycle so that you know.
Yeah, but we haven't
where
talked.
you're
We
at.
haven't told
I'm
them.
getting there. It's an intro, Kevin.
Okay, baby.
Now I don't know what I'm talking about.
I'm sorry to interrupt your flow. Sorry, baby. It seemed like you were referring to tracking it without introducing that we're tracking these things.
I'm not even talking about the way that we're tracking it now. I'm talking about having an app that lets me know when I'm going to start bleeding, because I don't fucking know. Like, it took me 15 years to be like, maybe I should check. Like, I always thought that my period was really irregular, and then when I started tracking it, it's very, very regular, and I had no idea.
Okay, so when you're talking about tracking it in this talk, you were talking about an app. Like,
This is
there's men who will be listening to this.
The way that we're taught to understand our bodies in America, where I grew up, is it only matters when you're bleeding and nothing else matters. You think your period is 5 days. You don't think of an entire menstrual cycle. I didn't, ever. Yes, PMS is a thing, but I never thought that would be at the same time, like, in a cycle. Like, it's totally something that you, like, shove to the side. So I have learned to track just when I'll be bleeding so that you don't surprise yourself, or, you know, to be prepared or whatever, things like that. I had never thought to track the entire thing, that, like, day 15 matters.
Okay, but
we're not trying to have children, so I don't track ovulation.
But you were tracking it with an app. Liz, I'm trying to get the first part of the tracking. You use an app. What app do you use? Do you remember?
I don't remember
Okay,
what it's called.
we'll link it. But what does the app do? You enter in. It keeps track of your dates.
It's a
like, there's
calendar.
men listening to
it's
this.
It's a calendar.
Yeah.
So the day you start bleeding, you hit a button, and you can track symptoms like bloating, how heavy it is, if there's any kind of irregularity, spotting, blah, blah, blah. Basically so that you can just create a track record and then look back and be like, oh, last month I also was bloated on this day. Like, this is something that happens to me. So when Kevin started talking about this follicular and luteal thing, I had never thought of the entire cycle. I've heard that there's like a 28-day cycle. I know that. But the only part that mattered was start bleeding, end bleeding. Like, I never thought about, I'm not trying to get pregnant, so I never thought about ovulation, like, none of these things. So the fact that your hormones shift so much in that time, I had experiences in training that I refer to it as rawness. I feel very raw, and it's so intense that it's like, if you touch me like this, I'm like, just do not fucking touch me. Like, it is heightened sensitivity to pain. Like, it does hurt more. My, like, pain threshold is really low. It is that, but it's an emotional rawness that I just cannot handle the intensity, and I get through it because we're taught to just suck it up. It doesn't matter, do this thing.
Well, you're also a very physically tough person, so it must have been striking
but I'm not
for
saying
you.
that I'm even gonna not do that anymore. I'm still gonna push on those days.
Yeah.
But knowing that I can actually make adjustments to be like, okay, maybe I'm jumping ahead.
Well, slow down, because this is nobody talks about this. It's worth taking our time and going down all the little side paths.
So on those
good,
days
baby.
of rawness, like emotional, physical rawness, the way Kevin was saying it's like training two people, it is actually like I'm a completely different person.
Yeah, like you're an Iron Lady 5-10 days ago where nothing stops you or hurts you, and then suddenly you don't even want to be touched.
Yeah, and it's if I don't track my cycle and know that this is something that happens in a phase, I'm like, why am I crazy? Like, why am I just, yesterday I was fine, and now I can't fucking handle anything. What is wrong with me, kind of thing? There's nothing wrong with me. On top of that, Kevin talking about the hemispheres of the brain firing differently. This part's where I feel crazy, but it's actually a thing. Parts of your brain are actually heightened that will recognize facial expressions, but not all facial expressions, particularly, angry?
Well, it's complicated. We're not going to go too deep into the science of this. We talk about it on the forum. but one hemisphere of the brain, I think it's the right hemisphere of the brain, is more sensitive to sad faces, like recognizing sad faces, but especially in women who've had physical violence in their life and in their childhood. And then the left hemisphere, which is luteal generally, is more prone to recognizing angry faces and even seeing neutral faces as angry.
Right.
Which I find really interesting.
So this is a thing that I literally experienced, which is that I look to Kevin sitting on the edge of the ring watching me sparring, and I read his face to see whether he's disappointed in me, whether he's happy with what I'm doing, whatever. My brain is responding to hormones and chemicals which make me hypersensitive to reading a neutral face from Kevin as disappointed or angry.
It can do two things. It can make you so sensitive that you are able to pick up maybe a little bit of disappointment and magnify it. It's like suddenly people seem angry with you. Whereas it might be a very small facial element, but you become like, it's like having a very attuned sense of smell. Or you could even project an angry face on a neutral face. Like apparently in this one study, both things happen during a heightened luteal phase, mid-luteal phase on the right amygdala, which is really, really interesting because you're training and you're like looking at faces to get cues whether you're doing things right.
And it's like there's a projector projecting an expression on the face that might not really be there. This is not to say that people who menstruate during these phases become crazy. I'm really trying to take away the way we actually talk about how much we hate women, honestly. Like that there's something wrong with you and you should be able to not do this or avoid this or something. Like there are actual things happening in the brain. And another thing that was interesting is during the luteal phase, which is after ovulation, the brain will hold, like remember negative experiences more strongly.
Oh man.
So why this is really interesting is that if you're sparring in your follicular phase pre-ovulation and you have a bad sparring day, it's not going to stick as hard.
Yeah.
So it's kind of okay. If you're in your luteal phase, exactly the same day, exactly the same experience, your brain is like, I fucking suck and I can't block right kicks, so I don't want to stand here anymore. And you'll remember it.
You'll not only remember it, you will learn a lesson. Like when you learn a lesson through fear and pain, like fear and pain are big teachers of the human organism. If you learn that lesson, at least some of these studies suggest, if you learn that lesson in, let's say, the luteal phase, it's different for different women, so you don't want to overgeneralize, that lesson will stick harder.
Yep.
So if you're like, I'm going to try this thing out, and then it fucking backfires and you get blasted, you might not want to ever try that thing out again.
Yeah. But this very important to point out, this is not to say don't spar in your luteal phase, you have to take time off, whatever. If you know me, I don't say this stuff ever. That's not my thought process.
Yeah.
Instead, when we're talking about training two people, is if you're a coach, for example, and you are coaching people who menstruate, and you don't have to like track their menstrual cycle with them or whatever, but if you understand that on day 11 of that person's cycle, you can be like, fucking stand in there and be brave and whatever, but on day 20 of that cycle, if you criticize that person, it is going to have longer ramifications than what you're going for. You can be a much better coach if you're aware of how to talk to your fighter. And as a fighter, if you're aware that on the follicular side, it's funny that you can't block any left kicks today, and on your luteal side, you're the worst fighter who ever lived because you can't block a fucking right kick. Knowing that that's brain chemistry, I think is important. And I, again, want to emphasize this because the way we talk about women and people who menstruate and hating female hormones and stuff so much, that there's so much criticism, and in the patriarchy, we internalize it ourselves. I honestly am a person who, for myself, is like, suck it up and don't have that problem, and it's just not possible. When I was going through a very serious crisis when we first left Petrungrung, it was very, very hard for me. And I went to a doctor, and the psychiatrist gave me an emergency, like, anti-anxiety pill. I've never taken medication like this ever in my life, so I had no idea what to expect. I took half of a pill, which I think had a half-life of 6 days, 3 days.
It was way longer than we thought it would be.
There are people who need this medication. There are people who really need it, and it keeps them alive, and it helps them. I cannot handle this medicine. When I took this pill and it started working, I went into a place that to me kind of felt like when you're drunk and your filter comes off and you're just like kind of gonna say whatever you're gonna say. Kevin was like, I don't know you. Like, I'm talking to a different person.
Yeah.
The way antidepressants and anti-anxiety medications work is brain chemistry. It's happening in your brain. This is real. So if your hormones cause changes in your brain, that is as real as I cannot talk to you right now, you are a different person. We'll wait until the chemistry changes or it wears off.
Well, the things that were kind of interesting to me, and I looked at, 12, 15 studies looking, and the problem with the science is not a problem, but the difficulty in the science is that the studies are always very narrow. So they test for one particular trait of one part of the brain during one part of the cycle, and then you try to extrapolate and build pictures of the things. But one of the things that was interesting to me was the kinds of things they were talking about that change phase to phase, that could change, are really important to building yourself as a fighter. And so, for instance, from my memory, and we have a graphic, have a spreadsheet on this that I put up, is in the luteal phase, the left amygdala is stimulated, and the things that you become sensitive to could be sensitive to are fearful faces, angry faces,
criticism,
voice, auditorial critique, like, or anger, like voice information, criticism, like you say, in the luteal phase, you could be much more attuned to error.
Yeah, for yourself.
Which means that
my inner coach.
If you're like trying to be like, oh, step on the kick and do this thing, you might become very, very sensitive to error, which means that you're constantly overcorrecting yourself and feeling awful about it, probably. It's probably a pretty harsh realm to be in. And these are very interesting kind of like dynamics to be supercharged during a 3 to 5 day stretch in your training. If you knew that these things might be heightened in the next 5 days, you can either change your training to avoid certain problems, or you can just be like much more forgiving of yourself and recognizing you're like, I'm seeing angry faces today, or damn, I am so super critical. These 5 days are super critical. Like, I'm a super critical person, self-critical person. I see errors everywhere. And on the follicular phase, which corresponded to stimulating the right amygdala, much more emotional memory, like fear conditioning, if I recall, being more sensitive to social placement in a hierarchy of a group. So wanting to fit in, like, these become important elements, are social pressures. So if you're in a gym and you're like not feeling like you're fitting in, or you're the only woman in the gym, or the girls are all cliquey and you're on the outside, at that time you might be very like sensitive to this. Reading sad faces apparently is a thing. What's even more interesting or complicated about this is, depending on your own biochemistry and your personal history, you might your left hemisphere of the amygdala might be simulated in the follicular phase.
Oh.
The opposite.
That's interesting.
That which side of the amygdala is triggered can vary strongly, not across the population, but like if you were a subject of sexual abuse as a child or physical violence, if you've had it seems that if you've had powerful emotional damage or attack, your amygdala and your biochemistry reformulates itself.
Yeah.
It distributes how memories are encoded, how pain is avoided or learned from. And so this is what kind of is interesting is you can't go look at what the studies be like, oh, that means that in my luteal phase, I'm going to be more sensitive to error.
Yeah, you have to track yourself.
What we've realized is you have to find your own patterns.
Yeah.
The studies tell you maybe kinds of things to look for.
Yeah.
Like, are you prone to error? Are you sensitive to angry faces? And that leads to what you started doing, which was tracking yourself.
Oh, yeah, so I made a video of this that you can see that shows a little bit of like what, I can't actually think of the word in English.
What are you thinking, Thai?
Yep.
We'll say it in Thai.
Claw. So like there are these like articles that I'm following. So it's like my aggressiveness, dominance, worth, which is like days that I feel like I'm worthless, I can't do this, why am I even trying, versus days that are like very confident.
Let me pull back for a second. So you've created a spreadsheet on Google Docs or something, right?
Spreadsheet. Yeah.
And we've laid out the calendar of the
what day
of the cycle 1 through, I think we put it up to 31 even if you want to use that. And in every day there's a list of categories, of emotional type categories of that you're rating on a 1 to 10 scale, right? So every day when you spar, this is related to your heavy sparring with Yokumpan.
Right.
You then have your experience and then you come home and you rate what your emotional experience was in these, like, what is it, 9 categories or 10 or something like that?
It's like that.
Can you list, I know you listed a couple of them, but try from your memory, what are the categories that you've been rating yourself on so that you can figure out what the pattern of sensitivities
so
are?
Aggression, dominance, endurance, which is kind of like an energy thing. And then right after that is recovery. Because there are times that my endurance is really low, but my recovery is really high. So like I'm tired, but I can pull myself back into it. Or like I do something wrong, or I feel bad about something that happened, but I'm able to like get on the rope better. And then there are days that like one thing happens and I just never recover from it, and it's really hard. What was interesting is that we've only been tracking this for, I think it's only the 2nd month now.
I think you're in
But
maybe 2 point.
I had a really hard day. Like I cry all the time. It's not a big deal. I cry even when I'm in my like good times. But I had a really, really hard day, and Kevin, I share my spreadsheet with Kevin. Kevin has access to it. He looked at it and he came in and he was like, I just want to let you know that looking at last month, you had 3 days that were really rough last month at this time.
In this way, like
on the rawness scale.
On the rawness scale, yeah.
And he's like, just so that you can know that you might be hitting a rough patch. You might be hitting some, turbulence for the next couple of days. And just knowing, like when I went the next day, Kevin didn't come with me, I went alone. And just in my head being like, today might suck, felt okay. And I actually had a good day. My numbers were really high that day, like in a good way.
Well, that's one of the more interesting things about this is just because you are some sensitivities are amplified because of how your brain is wired, isn't fate.
No.
Like, these are not just all detractions of female capabilities. Like, you suck at this date and on this date. These are all intensifications that probably have bonuses and weaknesses, strengths and weaknesses. Any organism that developed certain traits allows it to survive, right?
Yeah.
So if you're moving into a rawness state, maybe you're also developing other capacities. Like maybe you're raw, but you can recover. Like you need to discover what the shape of your own patterns are.
Yeah, or maybe you want to make adjustments that are like, I'm in a phase where my like critical brain is going to be going nuts. Like I'm just going to be criticizing all of the mistakes I'm making. So don't focus on technique at that time.
That's yeah.
Focus on something else, like focus on strength or focus on just standing closer, like something that's not technical.
That's very interesting.
Because your brain's not in the right place for it. I want to make sure that I mention this because there's such a strong tendency to be like, well, that's not my direct experience, so it's not real.
Yeah.
I don't take birth control. I don't take any kind of hormonal birth control. So people who menstruate who are on hormonal birth control might have weird hormonal stuff going on where you're constantly in a certain level of
maybe it's
phase.
not as
it's not as high and low.
Yeah.
You could kind of be pushed more towards like less peaks and valleys, but tending towards more critique or something. And then women who no longer menstruate due to menopause or something like this could also totally change.
But the ultimate point is, it might be helpful to just track your own patterns.
The idea is pay attention to
it's your shape. It's who you are.
Our bodies, ourselves.
Isn't that a famous book or something?
It is from the 60s.
Yeah. Another component you mentioned. I guess we'll post the list of categories. We didn't cover them all. There was rawness, worth.
Pain threshold.
Worth is a very big one.
Worth is the hardest one.
So talk a little bit about worth.
I don't want to talk about worth.
Okay, maybe it'll help somebody who's struggling with worth, like especially female. To me, that's one of the more important ones because that's what gives you value, makes you value what you're doing.
Worth is my word for what probably many people would call motivation. I feel very unmotivated today. Or like, what is it all for? I just don't want to do it. How am I still this shitty this far into my career? Things like this. That when I have a low worth number, it's not good. Like those are really, really hard days where it's like, what the fuck is this for? It's really like, I want to quit, like high quit thoughts. But then there's days that shifts where worth is quite high, where it's like, I'm getting better. Like I can feel myself getting better. And it's people who call this motivation. It's like
But it's kind of good if we haven't had enough tracking to really develop a pattern. We've had 2 months, maybe a little over 2 months, I think. But if you know that the next 3 days, 5 days, worth might be low,
yeah,
that's really important to know because it's not there's something wrong with you or where you're at in your life is not good. But
or that you're actually shittier than you were yesterday. You're probably not. You're just thinking differently.
And I'll throw this out there now, although we haven't really spent a lot of time figuring it out. But it's my intuition that maybe these very low worth days are actually part of a kind of manic depressive or bipolar dynamic where your worth is very low, but it also could possibly also in that phase punch up very high, that you're stuck on the low end of a pole, that actually those days are maybe extreme days. And we're just starting to explore this idea that maybe low worth days could actually be exaggeratedly high worth days because you're just in a state of kind of like a manic depressive thing and you're stuck on one end of it. So that's something worth studying or thinking about in your own life. If you start hitting really low worth days hormonally, it might be part of a kind of like bipolarity.
Yeah.
And it might be valuable to explore what the other pole might be. It was something we've just started thinking about. Another thing that I think is really important about this that you mentioned, but we didn't talk a lot about, is coaching.
Yeah.
It's like, for one thing, Most people's coaches are male coaches, just statistically and culturally. A lot of male coaching is like shaming, motivating people through shame, harshness, like putting people down, challenging them, physically challenging them, sometimes physically hurting them, like smacking somebody so they guard.
There's also I can't think of the word now. There's also a like tendency towards this hyperbolic and very unrealistic vocabulary that's like, we're fearless, we're whatever. Like, nobody is fearless. Like, you should not be ashamed if you're feeling fear. You just have to deal with that fear.
Okay, but
Yeah.
I that's a separate thing, but I didn't get to my point actually,
Okay.
which is these tendencies in male coaching, if you look at them, they don't match up well with some of the things that can be really amplified in the amygdala's response to phases. If you are in a phase where you are very prone to error detection and to voice criticism, and your coach is yelling at you, and he has an angry face and you're sensitive to angry face, whatever he is doing is probably damaging you.
Yeah.
And not making you better.
Yeah.
Because it's going straight to your fucking amygdala, which is your fear center, which is your animal memory of fear, of pain. And so those things might at another time toughen you up.
Yeah.
Right? It might be good to callous you, but there's something about the male toughening approach, especially how men respond to shame a little bit differently than women do. You could be hitting all the wrong buttons at a certain phase.
Yeah.
And that's something to know. If you care about your students, your female fighters, you got to know that something that might have worked last week is having a very bad effect.
Yeah, and this might not only be a like, be nice during this time.
No,
it doesn't have to
yeah.
be like that either. There are times when I'm in that state, when my fear is heightened and my critique is heightened, and I'm just fucking like drowning. And Kevin's actually very complimentary of me. Kevin's very encouraging. He's very sweet. And I can't hear it. Like, my brain just cannot hear it.
Yeah.
It's like, it's just not registering. Which means that as a coach, you don't have to be super complimentary during these times either. It might be a 2 days of no critique at all. Like, not good, not bad, just fucking like, we get the work done.
Or you got to
thing.
find what the thing is that works for them then. And I guess this goes back to that other idea that we come up with this idea that you're really training 2 people.
Yeah.
And it's probably more like 5 people. But it's start thinking of 2 people.
Yeah.
Like, these kinds of training experiences do really well in this part of the cycle.
Yeah.
And they backfire
When
on
Bruce
this part of
Banner
the
is
cycle.
Bruce Banner, don't shoot him. When he's the Hulk, you can shoot him.
Totally.
But don't, like, sit him down and talk about when to feed the kids. Like,
yeah, maybe. Also, as a fighter, if you realize that you're 2 people, you have to calm down about comparing yourself to yourself, and maybe talk a little bit about this
and you also have to let
self-comparison.
go of this, like, the real me thing.
Well, what's the real me?
I really
thing?
have a hard time
Well,
with
what
it.
is that? Tell me.
It's too complicated, but
Baby, come on.
The short version is that we really like to think that there's a real version of ourselves and then some kind of like performed version of ourselves, but we're always like devolving back to the real one. The real one's always showing through, and the real one's usually quite negative. Neither is real. They're both real. The version of yourself that's 100% drag, that you're completely performing, is as real as whatever this like thing that you fall back into is, that you think is real because it's easier. If you have a tendency towards rage, that's not the real you. It's just a really well born groove. If you have a tendency towards being submissive and polite, that's not the real you. It's just the groove that's very well worn that you're gonna like habitually go towards because water follows the path of least resistance. So this idea that like there are days that you're tough, but then fuck, the real me is showing where I'm really tired and not performing well. They're both real. Like, it's not like Bruce Banner's real and the Hulk is this like mistake. He's both. Both are incredibly real, and you go between the two and you have to find some kind of like, this is how I deal with myself on this day, this is how I deal with myself on that day. And all of it is about adjustment. None of it is about fixing. None of it is about, I don't do that anymore. Like, this, what I was saying before about how like fighters are fearless. Like, no. You have different levels of fear, and how you deal with that fear is what makes you good or not good on that day. It's not like I solved that fear problem and now I'm never scared again kind of thing. It's like how you talk about every fighter has a breaking point. The best fighter you've ever seen has a breaking point. It's just where that is. Like, you have to find it.
Yeah, and or if you're that fighter, you hide your breaking point, and
Totally.
you give it goes back to that poker analogy, is that you hide your breaking point, but every human being will break. They break at different ways and at different times, and great fighters look like they don't have one.
Yeah.
But they fucking have one. You take baseball bats to fucking Mayweather and
the Fist of the White Lotus, his like one.
Yeah, his palm, his
secret.
His pulse was in his palm.
Yeah.
Kung Fu movie that I love. And then I also, another interesting part of this as a side thing is that eventually as a fighter, you don't have control over when in your cycle you're fighting. So you not only want to train yourself differently to your cycle patterns to get the most out of you, but you also want to learn how to fight effectively when you're raw.
Yeah.
Or when you're on a fucking low worth day.
Yeah.
Like, you want to become the best version of yourself, whatever cards you're dealt that day. It's like cards. Like, maybe you have to bluff a lot if you don't got a lot in the tank on that day. You have to learn how to pretend like you do. I don't know what the skills are.
Well, it's the same thing that I was saying about finally learning, or finally giving myself permission to give importance to my cycle and track it, is that I had to cut weight for this fight, only a very, very small bit, but I have such small experience cutting weight because I always fight people bigger than me that we did like a test run. For people who menstruate, your body does different things and your hormones do different things in terms of simple stuff like holding water. So where you are in your cycle will make it easier or harder even to cut weight. You still have to cut the weight, whether you can't be like, oh, make it 2 pounds heavier because I'm going to be at this point in my cycle. If you can get someone to agree to that, that's great, but you still have to do the thing. So on my test run, it was super easy because I was in the follicular phase, and then you move into the luteal phase, and then even though you did this test run and it was really easy, the next time you do it, it's not as easy. And instead of being like, what the fuck is wrong with me? My body won't drop it. Like, what's wrong? It's like, it's just going to be different this time.
I think that's a very big part, is finding ways to respond other than what's wrong with me.
Or I can't do that now.
Yeah.
Right?
What's one more thing that was very interesting to me? Oh, it's not that interesting, I guess. But one of the things we did was we changed our calendar. We had a little calendar given by Apasara to you, and we would change the day every day, like October 17th or whatever. We changed the day now to the day in the cycle. So it's like almost like tracking the moon in a weird way. It's like basically instead of what date is it today, what day in the cycle is it today? But does that affect you in any way? For me, it's like literally starting to think about everything in the context of changing patterns.
Well, yeah, that's true. It's not, I never look at the calendar. I'm like, oh, October 17th, like that doesn't matter. But if you're like, okay, day 17, that means something.
Yeah, it's almost like, to me, it's like tuning in to like, well, what interesting things might show themselves on day 17 or day 23 or something like that. I don't know, it's very kind of like, my little like intuition geeked out feeling is every point in the phase of the cycle is a trade-off, has advantages and disadvantages, and that even ones that seem like they're really negative might hold within themselves great capacities. It's not just, I'm physically weak, I'm raw, I'm not a very good fighter. The human body, the human organism, the creature, had to survive as prey, like for millions of years, right? So all phases, it's capable of defending itself. And I'm imagining that those capabilities, every part of the face probably has different strengths, different weaknesses. Even on days when your worth is really high, maybe you have brought some weaknesses that you're not, maybe your worth is really high, but now you're socially sensitive to criticism of people who don't believe in you. So your worth can be knocked down. Like, I don't know. I'm just saying it's interesting to explore what hidden strengths phases might also entail and what hidden weaknesses that might pattern themselves up. So we're tracking this, and I'm imagining around the like 7 months in, we'll start to see. We've color coded the ratings, so reds and greens will start to maybe like show their patterns over time. And then the other interesting thing is you might getting low scores, and like, what happens if you become aware that you get low scores, like rawness scores, and then you're like, well, today's gonna be a raw day, and then you are prepared for it, and you have like not a bad day, and so your scores go up. So your pattern changes.
Yeah.
I don't know. I seem like I lost your enthusiasm on this when I got it going on it.
No, it seems like, I don't know. There are things that are like, I've noticed I don't do well when I've only slept 2 hours, where people like totally understand that connection. And you can kind of solve that by try to go to bed earlier, try to not have caffeine, whatever. Like, there are all these adjustments you can make to try to get more sleep. You can't necessarily change the more sleep part of this.
Yeah.
So instead, you can't change that part, so how do you adjust on the other side of it?
Yeah. And maybe we can do another Muay Thai Bones subject on this, like 4 months in, 5 months in, when you've seen what you've tried to change in your own training and approach. Why are you laughing?
Well, this is an interesting example of the adjustment. So I don't know if we've talked about this on a Bones before. I feel like we have. I do really well performance-wise when I'm a little bit pissed off. Like, a little angry is awesome for Sylvie. I can't switch it quite yet. It's not like a light switch for me quite yet, but I can kind of like access it a little bit more. There was a day not too long ago where I was just not in a good place. And Kevin was so sweet. He was like, it's okay, baby, just take it down. Just like take the power down.
I remember that. I'm like, bring the power down.
Take the power down, be easy on yourself, just be nice. And I just fucking like went into like kill mode.
Baby, that was one of the funniest
and
things.
I was like, what the fuck is this? It was like round 11 of the day or something.
You didn't like me telling you what to do.
Like it.
You're like, fuck
mad.
you.
But so we've kind of experimented a little bit too with this idea that like in certain mental states or emotional states or whatever the thing is, like gripping to a part of it, like emphasizing a part of it instead of pushing it, like pushing it away, might actually be good. So on low worth days when I'm like, I just fucking suck, you can kind of maybe take that slightly pissed off, be like, I fucking suck and I'm gonna hurt you.
Totally.
Like, I'm shitty and I'm gonna hurt a Yod Moy.
Yeah, like little Goggins, like reversing it.
History.
Totally.
Like, you just find.
You're gonna lose to the worst fighter ever. David Goggins.
I may be ugly, but goddamn
Totally.
it. Yeah, like
Totally.
that.
And I want to it occurs to me that we didn't put this in context, and I don't want to go too deep into it, but it also occurs to me that the reason why I started looking into the amygdala and hormones is because one of the biggest challenges you've faced as we've moved in this 3.0 thing is that you're sparring 3.0 sparring, you're sparring 10 rounds, basically an hour a day against a Yod Moy in Yod Kumpan, and he redlines you. You're redlining every day. He's not redlining you physically. He's redlining your fear and your, I don't know, your composition. He's trying to make your roof break. But he's not breaking you. He's just like making it shake, right? And every single day is doing this. And I think one of the hardest things that you've had to face in this 3.0 sparring stuff is that you are exposing yourself to very high fear, cortisol level responses. Like, you are spiking every day for an hour. It's not just hard training, it's the emotional place you're going to is very fucking difficult. And I'm very proud's the wrong word, but proud of you. I admire you to be able to go to this like emotional place every day. It's like having a nightmare every night. No, for real.
No, it's
like your heart rate is going way up, your fear, and I'm like, the reason why I started looking into the amygdala is like your fucking amygdala must be for an hour just firing.
Well, this is the hard thing.
Firing, like fear memories.
We'll have a vocab word of the day. Mithridatism is the word for taking a little bit of poison every day in order to make yourself immune to it. If you've watched Princess Bride, this is what Wesley did. The thing about this in my sparring is that it is a like desensitization kind of thing, but it is not I am taking a harmless dose of poison every day.
Yeah.
But who is it who says that poison is a matter of dose? Is that Aristotle?
Oh, I actually don't know that one, but that
it's
could
like
be.
Anything can be poison at a certain dosage.
Yeah. Which
but
is true.
The thing is, it's not a like little bit where I'm not feeling it and now I can take more kind of thing. It's like you are taking a dose that makes you sick every day, but it's not killing you.
It's so intense, baby.
But it moves. The line moves.
It moves, but he moves it with you. Like it's very. The benefits have been really amazing. Like your Muay is really changing. We set to change it, and it's fucking changing. But it's a very harsh path, and that's why we started looking into the amygdala and the phases of menstrual cycle, because you're spiking, you're hitting your fear centers so much. Every part of the month you're going to be responding differently, and just to being able to manage and get some kind of compass heading, because it's so it's like trying to sail in a storm.
Yeah.
But at least keep the boat pointed in the right direction, I guess, and keep it from capsizing, right?
Yeah.
So, I don't know. My hope is that this conversation starts, like, I've never read anybody talking about this in terms of fighters. I know in female athletics there's probably been some discussion, but in terms of fighters, this is so important. Am I going straight?
Check. Continue your thought.
This is so important because of the nature of what training and fighting as a fighter is. It's not the same as pole vaulting or sprinting or
Swimming. Like, just do it
swimming, like enhancing your performance. What the fighter really is an artist who works with the clay of fear. The fear, your opponent's fear, your fear. Enduring pain is one thing, but the pain just triggers fears. And so how your body is processing fear emotionally is a really important component of it. I would think this is one of the most important elements of female fight training that even if someone's thought about it, no one's talking about it. And so hopefully this will just lead to people thinking about, talking about their own perceptions of their own cycles. Like, man, if you have a problem with faces, certain kinds of faces, as a fighter, that's very difficult. Baby, if you're fighting and you go back to your corner, you have a tough round, you go back to your corner and you see faces of your coaches being angry with you.
You do not have to theoretically give me I see that all the time.
Why?
All the time. Oh my God, do you hate me? I'm doing terribly.
But I'm saying as a fighter, you go back to the corner and if you're face sensitive.
Baby, I'm saying I've experienced
that's a very hard, like, maybe, I'll say this as your husband, I have willfully made an attempt not to make different faces, like to put on a face. I've made an attempt to look at you, like in your eyes, and connect with you with some positivity, like I'm coming from positivity, because I feel like if I do that, it'll be easier to read my face. If I'm like not looking and I'm lost in my own world, I don't know what my face is doing. But if I'm like looking at you and connecting to you, and I have in my heart like positive thoughts, I'm like, my face will become more readable.
Have you noticed it?
Yeah, maybe I'm making it up in my own head because I'm looking for stuff. But when I look at you and I have that positive element and it's not a particular thought, and then I see your eyes meet mine, and you have a recognition, you recognize something, it feels like what's really happening at certain times of the cycle is you're just very face sensitive. And so if you connect with somebody who's sensitive to face at that time, it could be a positive experience. It doesn't have to be a negative experience. I don't know, it's something I've been thinking about, putting more conscious effort into it. So if a fighter's coming back to the ring, to the corner, and you're like not looking at them, and they're face sensitive at that time, that could be a very harsh thing. I don't know, there's so much to think about, the ways in which changing sensitivities can be accommodated and played to.
Even just recognized is a good start.
Yeah, like you say though, we really want to get away from the idea that like women are crazy or these are incapacities. I think it's just intensifications. Why are you laughing?
Because it's so hard to... I've talked about this before, actually, in Muay Thai Bones before, that when you are not a man, like the whole spectrum of not a man, and raised in the patriarchy, you struggle from this. You have thoughts, and then you have feelings about those thoughts. And so you can tell yourself, like, yeah, I'm totally gonna, like, acknowledge that there are things outside of my control and blah, 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 blah. And then you just totally default back to the, like, there's something wrong with me. Like, I don't have, it's very, very hard to actually internalize and re-record things that you've been raised to believe and feel.
And this is one reason why I find female fighters, in a way, much more admirable than male fighters, because they really have to overcome more to even be performing at a decent level because of those internalized wars with oneself. Like, I know men have a very hard time as fighters and presenting as a tough guy or something like that, but the culture holds them in that place. There's slots for them. Female fighter, there's no place to really rest yourself. You're like climbing this mountain and you have footholds and handholds, but there's no like, and now I'm home. You're constantly trying to overcome these elements, and I think this just complicates the whole picture.
Yeah.
I don't know.
It's complex though. This kind of leads into the diet thing, but I don't know if it feels too redundant. Like if we should stick in a different one in between.
Do you want to go into the diet thing? Let's go.
Heading into the diet thing. So Kevin and I have talked about my diet before on Muay Thai Bones. You can look it up. We call it 1+1 keto. The short version of it is that we only eat every other day. So there's like a 36 about hour fast. So on the day that we eat for ketosis, and then there's a full day of fasting, and then eat again. I totally train like this. I fight like this. This is all the time. There's no adjustment made to like fight day or if it's going to be a hard day or an easy day. I don't change my training based on whether it's an eating day or a fasting day. I don't change my fights. None of this. It's just how I am.
And this has been 2 years now?
Has it?
I feel like in this, maybe it's a year and a half.
Yeah.
Year and a half.
So the reason I went keto weirdly, Kevin was fasting every other day but not eating keto, and I went keto but was not fasting every other day, and then we
put them together. It was you put your chocolate in my peanut butter.
It's delicious. Put my body in my food. So the reason I went keto was 100% for mental stability, basically. I did not care whether it enhanced or reduced my physical performance. I'm not trying to gain or lose weight. I'm not trying to do anything like sell a hot diet. I totally was interested in taking away the impact that probably carbs and sugar were having on my mental state. And in doing so, it had the positive effect that I was hoping it would have, and so I've stuck with it. I am not a kind of person who is like, you should do this diet for moral, ethical, or political reasons. Everyone should.
You don't recommend it for anybody, even.
I recommend you try it and see if it helps.
Yeah, but I'm saying you're not like, other people should be doing this.
No. People who contact me are often like, has it reduced your cardio? Or like, what do you do about your glycogen stores or whatever? Just play with it. My theory about almost everything is try it, see what happens, mess with it, see what happens then, like basically experiment. So my diet has changed again recently, still 1+1 keto, but I've taken dairy out.
Which is
it's hard.
huge because you
really
relied on
hard.
dairy a lot.
Not only did I
for your
rely
fat
on
source.
dairy as like a snack fat store, like cheese and cream is delicious and awesome and easy as a like, I can just grab that. I don't have to prepare anything. Taking it out was, in terms of convenience, really difficult, but in terms of like, I really miss this kind of thing, was not as hard as I actually anticipated it being. Today's an eat day, and I had an iced coffee and I just put coconut milk in it instead of the heavy cream that I normally would put in it. But the reason I took dairy out was Kevin and I have been testing my blood since I went keto, just because we wanted to track it. We wanted to create
we wanted
a trackable,
data, like a data history.
Again, returning to the track shit.
Yeah, we're not those kinds of people, really, but what you're doing is so extreme, it feels like you should have data.
Yeah. But so I think this was the third time. We try to do it every 6 months, but I think it's been almost a year since the last time we did my blood test. For whatever reason, I've been having some like abdominal issues, lots of pain. I think I had a ovarian cyst. I had one in college, so I kind of knew what that felt like, and so suspected it and got it checked out, whatever. So on this blood test, Kevin just had this intuition. He's like, I want you to take this cancer marker test at the same time, because they can do that in the blood test. I did not want to do this. I am not a like, I want to know what's wrong with me kind of person. And maybe not surprisingly, but very horrifyingly, when those tests came back, I had high markers for ovarian cancer. So I went to the...
Well, it was a little high. Like, it was like, this should be checked.
High markers. Go check this.
Yeah, but
basically.
they
Not
could
like
be much.
skyrocketing,
Yeah, they could be much higher. They were moderately
But so there are other things, other conditions that can cause these markers to be high other than cancer, which is why you go and have it checked. So I went, and it was this horrible 3 days in the hospital, like having these tests run and checked. And I've been diagnosed with something that used to be categorized as endometriosis, but now has its own category. It's called adenomyosis. So basically what that is that your endometrium in your uterus grows into the muscle of your uterus, and then does what endometrium tissue does, which is that when it's time to shed it during your menstrual cycle, it bleeds into the muscle instead of coming out of your body, and creates scar tissue, and that can cause all kinds of like swelling and general inflammation in your body. It can be quite painful, and it actually causes intestinal, like gastrointestinal issues as well, which is probably why I was having so many stomach problems for a long time.
We should say you've had gastrointestinal stuff for at
6
least
years,
7. No, it was back when you were in Chiang Mai. You were like, maybe I should stop eating bread, remember? So maybe even 8 years you had gastrointestinal sensitivity that has progressed and intensified. And there's so much stuff you can Google about GI stuff and microbiome, and we don't need lots of comments on things that you should check or test, or don't need a doctory response to this, right? Believe me, we're
not a doctor.
Yeah, but this has probably been something that has been working counter to you for maybe even as much as 10 years.
Yeah, and it's probably worth pointing out again as we're talking about like making adjustments and tracking things and sensitivities. I am so much a bite down and deal with it kind of person that when we talk about me having gastrointestinal problems and this pain the pain's not been that long, maybe 8 months or something, but the gastrointestinal problems for like 7 years, it's just this is part of my life, I deal with it kind of thing. It was not a like...
You're like a cat, show pain. It's so crazy.
But so, with this diagnosis and doing a little bit of research, it was heavily suggested to cut out dairy and caffeine. I've not been able to cut out caffeine, but I've tried to
You've cut it down.
Reduce it, which is a little bit good. But this is basically just trying to deal with the inflammation. Like when you have an autoimmune chronic situation, you want to try to deal with the
triggers,
degrees of it that you can deal with. There's no treatment for what I have. There's no cure for what I have other than a hysterectomy, which is not what I'm doing. So, the point of why we're talking about this and just keeping people up to date on changes in my diet, many people asked me when I announced that I was cutting out dairy, they're like, why are you doing that? A bunch of vegans jumped on and told me why that's a great thing that I'm doing that. But in the vein of like, study yourself, make yourself a subject of one, experiment, check, what's good for you might not be good for someone else, what's good for someone else might not be good for you, is that I'm a little bit, what's the word? Insecure about this idea of a very like white upper class goopy woman thing to pay attention to every slight sensitivity that you have and become like so involved with yourself that you know that like a chia seed warmed with hot water is a good breakfast. Like I'm not advocating something like that, but I think it is very important to encourage people that there are things you can't change and there are things that you can. I cannot change my condition, but I can mitigate the pain, the discomfort. This actually is a hormonal issue too. So we were talking about tracking my hormones, tracking my cycle. That's all hormones. So it's even possible that what I'm experiencing with my hormonal shifts have to do with this. Not only did they cause this, but this is causing them then to fluctuate more, things like this. If you can make some change that has a significant impact on your performance or how you feel, or even just how you feel about yourself, go for it. And it does not matter whether other people agree with it, whether it's easy, whether it's like Kevin was saying, everything's a trade-off, right? Getting rid of dairy to like have my gastrointestinal thing be significantly better, where I'm like, oh my god, 2 days and my stomach hasn't hurt.
Yeah,
like
can you talk a little
ever.
bit about what happened when you took dairy out? Because it was a pretty powerful, a shocking change.
This was the weirdest thing, is that because we only eat every other day, I had actually suspected that I had a dairy sensitivity, like a lactose insensitivity, which I never had as a kid. Like, it's something that's developed, but I totally had this like intuition that was a thing. But because we only eat every other day, I was fasting every other day. I'm like, on days that I don't eat anything, I still have this stomach problem, so it can't be the dairy. I was still pounding caffeine and was not like, maybe it's the caffeine, but I had kind of been like, it can't be the dairy because I'm not eating every other day. When I cut it out for, I think it was within 3 or 4 days, which means that it's just lasting, like the inflammation lasts for long enough that it was still hitting me on the every other day fasting. When I cut it out for 3 or 4 days and that inflammation went away, it's that whole like, it's not that I love hitting my hand with a hammer, it's that it feels so good when I stop. You just accept that your stomach hurts every day. And then,
because you've gone through this for years.
And so then when it's like, shit, it's been 2 days and I haven't had a stomach ache. And then it's been 7 days and I haven't had a stomach ache. And then it's been 2 weeks and it's like, this is incredible. The getting rid of dairy was like big impact, not as big of a problem as I thought it would be. Caffeine does affect me. Caffeine does cause pain, inflammation. I've actually, in certain parts of my cycle, when my uterus is already inflamed, I've tried to reduce caffeine more at that time. Like, okay, I can kind of get away with it more on these days, less on these days. It's a trade-off thing where like the impact of getting rid of caffeine is actually more than the impact of getting rid of dairy, where it's like that trade-off is not one that I'm willing to do. But so this is partially an update on how Sylvie eats because people have shown interest in it, and it's partially a like PSA about monitoring yourself, not in a self-centered, obsessed way, but in a I'm important and how I feel can be adjusted way, and that everyone's different. So finding what those small things are for you are worthwhile.
Also, you talk about you've had a pretty powerful physiological response to taking out dairy. Like, I'm not even sure, like, you've lost weight.
Yeah, that happened when I went keto originally.
Yeah,
and
right.
And then it happened again when I cut out dairy.
So when you went keto, I think you were often around 48 kilos, right?
Before going keto?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then you went keto.
Went to 46.
And then you went, maybe 46.
For like a few months.
Oh, is that what it was?
Yeah, when I first started.
And then your body adjusted and you were probably around 47 most?
Yeah.
Yeah, right? And then you dropped out dairy and you dropped down again.
Yeah, I'm like 45.8.
Yeah, you're below 46. And maybe your body will adjust up again. But you seem like part of it is you probably dropped calories because heavy cream and coffee, cheese,
Butter, yeah.
Maybe your caloric intake went down.
Maybe.
Or maybe just the composition of your food has changed your composition of your body. You seem very lean and muscular.
I think that the dairy was causing inflammation and bloating, and the bloating has gone away, and so that's like a kind of shrinking down. But in talking about this, I don't want to fetishize losing weight as being a reason to do something or even necessarily a positive thing. I don't need to lose weight. So me losing weight is not a yay, let's make Sylvie smaller. What is notable about it is that I do well when my weight is low. Like I kind of have a energy and quickness when I'm around this weight. And in having lost weight but not lost any conditioning or power, it's just like a body composition change. That is interesting. When my body changes and my like strength power doesn't
so
change.
Strange because looking at you before, you didn't look like you could lose weight, and then you kind of like shrink wrapped again. And I hope it's all healthy. To me, as long as you're maintaining your muscle.
Yeah, Kevin was worried a little bit. You were worried about.
Yeah, I'm worried that your calorie. I mean, you fast every other day, and you don't like chow down on your eat days like crazily. You just eat healthy meals. But I'm like, I'm just wondering if your caloric intake has dropped or not. But that will be seen probably in the wasting of muscle, and you don't seem like you've lost muscle.
No.
Like you seem very muscular.
No, I've had at multiple gyms, people who've known me for quite a long time be looking at me and they're like, "What are you eating right now? You look really strong." I'm like,
it's
eggs.
Very interesting that you've lost weight but are strong.
Yeah.
And we'll see how that unfolds. I'm like, I try to talk to you about maybe getting a whey protein supplement to make sure you're getting enough protein, but
yeah, we're not sure about this because whey is dairy, so we don't know whether it's a lactose or dairy situation.
Yeah. But anyways, that's us sharing Sylvia's extravagant. Extreme journey. Like, I guess if you want to say extreme journey, like there's no high performance athlete in the world who fasts every other day that I know of, and is keto, and now dairy. Now you're taking out dairy.
Yeah, there are people who do intermittent fasting. GSP famously has talked about that and his body composition changing.
Yeah, but it's not close to what you're doing.
Sure.
And I would also caution people that if you do want to do 1+1, what Sylvie's doing, well, not even caution, there's a thread, we'll link it on the forum, which has all of Sylvie's vlogs and articles she's written about it, but you can also ask questions or post your own experiences. But also really important that we've discovered about this is that if you're going to do these kinds of extreme diets, you got to make sure you take care of your electrolytes, that you pay attention to your potassium and your sodium, and magnesium, and probably other things. But it's an extreme. If you're training hard, it's an extreme diet, and you have to be careful about it.
Yeah.
Like, you don't want to put yourself into deficits. And honestly, I don't know that we'd recommend this for anyone. Like, it's not like other people should be doing this. It just works for you so far, you know?
I also want to say that I'm a Buddhist. I believe in the middle path. There is no, like, the most austere, hardcore thing is good. There's nothing honorable or righteous or like glory about total restriction and like, oh, I don't eat that, blah 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 kind of thing. If there's a benefit to it, be like that. But there's also nothing great about like kind of hedonism and like overdoing things. You want to find this kind of like middle thing. So even though the keto diet is a little bit extreme and people who have been on it for a while and then gotten off of it kind of complain that it's so restrictive and like uninteresting, I don't feel in the way that I eat like I'm restricted. I don't feel like I'm missing out. I don't feel like I don't get to eat delicious or fun things. If it was like that, I probably still would lean towards it because of the benefits of not being a crazy person. Like, everything I do is to kind of keep my middle line peaks and valleys in check. The way we were talking about hormones, that's the same reason I went on keto. So I would accept not being able to eat chocolate cake at a birthday party kind of thing. That's something that is a trade-off for me that's valuable. But I don't want to fetishize like extreme, like I never eat anything white and no sugar, blah blah blah, like all these different kinds of things. Like,
well, I'm curious, but are you like, I don't want to fetishize or I don't want to be extreme, but you're one of the most extreme athletes in the world.
I do extreme,
like you're
extreme
constantly
things, but I think that it's really important in the same way that like I don't even know if this is an accurate comparison, but it feels like an accurate comparison to me, is that people who cut a lot of weight in the West for their like fight, that becomes the focus of like almost the entire fight camp. It's like everything is for this like harsh moment of getting down to that weight, and then on the other side of it is some kind of like celebration reward kind of thing that's really unsustainable and kind of like you should be patted on the back or celebrated for the restrictiveness of it.
Okay.
I don't think that there's any.
But I mean, I understand what weight cutting is, but how does this have to do with? I don't want to fetishize extremeness.
Because there's nothing healthy about or beneficial or honorable about the restrictiveness of it itself.
Okay.
The honor or benefit or health of it is the state it puts you in to cut those other things out. So instead of like, I'm so hardcore, I'm on the carnivore diet, I have the kind of willpower and self-control that I cannot eat these things, look at how great I am. Instead, it's like, for me, putting these things over here has this benefit, and so I stay over here. Rather than like, look at how hardcore and amazing I am. Like, I don't know. I don't want people to feel like they have
to be extreme.
Yeah, or that they're failing by not being all the way on this edge of it. Like, there may be some people who, for them, they get a benefit over here, and that's good enough. Like, for you, that's good enough. That's fine. That doesn't mean that these people suck and these people have no willpower. It's just that's where you are.
Yeah.
And that's cool. Like, good for you, not necessarily for me. Like, how's that working out for you?
Yeah,
kind of
totally.
thing. So because I'm so extreme, I don't want people to think that if they do some version of it that's on this end of it that works really well for them, that's like not enough.
Well, ultimately, the extreme dietary approaches were to mitigate other extreme things about you. Like, you were having huge mood swings that seemed very connected to sugar and carbohydrates. So you did this extreme thing to take out this other extreme thing and to level yourself up, right?
Yeah.
So I'm saying it was actually the extremeness is in the name of becoming more level.
Yeah, I guess maybe it's...
You know what I mean?
I don't know if this is a...
Like, if you can avoid hits of depression, then you're not being extreme.
I guess it's like this. If you're straight edge, but you totally leave open that other people can drink and be responsible people, that's cool. Rather than like, look at me, I don't do any of these things, I'm amazing kind of thing. It's like, for me, one drink, not good. For other people, casual drinking, whatever, fine. Like, that's how you do it kind of thing. I don't want to come off like I have some kind of moral or ethical stance on the rigidity of one's diet rather than like...
Yeah, your whole thing is everybody's unique and they find what works for them.
Yeah, like, my crazy was over here, so my diet's got to go over here.
Yeah, totally.
If your crazy's here,
Yeah.
your diet can be right there.
Yeah. Okay, very good. Okay, so next topic. Sylvie's advice call.
I'm so right about everything. I should start taking calls.
Sylvia was just saying, I don't want to do Sylvia's advice column.
So, I'll introduce this one.
Okay,
because
good.
Normally we have a Buddhist concept that totally stitches into Muay Thai in terms of like Muay Thai ethics or aesthetics, completely the same as some Buddhist ethic or aesthetic. This is kind of that.
Yeah, it's in that realm. We're gonna have to expand. We can't do like Buddhist vocabulary word of the day because there's only so many words and concepts. So we're branching out a little bit with that, and this is part of that. And you made a vlog, which was actually a really cool little vlog, but we wanted to expand and talk about the ideas behind that vlog.
So this, in the like Buddhist concept, Thai concept, or Muay Thai concept, it's a little bit about the Jayen Yen, which is cool-hearted, or like Tamjai, acceptance of training, or like your path kind of thing. So I've been practicing Vipassana meditation for 3 years about.
Okay. I'm not sure.
So the first time I went on a Vipassana retreat for 3 days, you stay in, it's called a kuti. It's like basically a small hut. It's very simple. It's just a bed, a bathroom, a little porch. They bring you 2 meals a day. You have nothing to do. There's nothing to do except sit and practice Vipassana, which is just paying attention to the body and the mind as not self, like observing them. So there's a crazy, like, just do menial tasks kind of thing. And so on that first retreat, I was like sweeping the porch that wraps around the circumference of the kuti, and I had this like complete
double rainbow moment.
No, it was like a epiphany in sweeping of these leaves that completely, in the way that we do a Buddhism tracking onto Muay Thai, that just exploded in my head as like, this is a lesson I need to apply to my Muay Thai, which there were some leaves that kind of got stuck in the wood of the porch that were just much harder to sweep than the other leaves that were very easy to sweep. And I had this like anamnesis truth just like enter into my mind, very Philip K. Dick, like pink laser of knowledge kind of thing that was like, that's Muay Thai, is that there's nothing wrong with my ability to sweep. Like, I don't suck at sweeping because these leaves are harder to sweep than the others. And there's actually nothing wrong with the leaves. They're not resisting me. They're just stuck in the wood. Like, it's a circumstance of cause and effect that made these leaves harder to sweep than the other leaves. And so you change angle, you sweep in different directions to try to dislodge it, or it takes more passes with the broom than you thought it would, or maybe you have to fucking reach down and pluck it out, or you might just have to accept that leaf is going to stay lodged in the wood. Like, that leaf is part of our lives now. It just stays in the kuti. So this to me was like a really profound realization about my own strain in Muay Thai. That I very often think there's something wrong with me that I can't sweep that leaf, which is like a technique that I just can't get. And so there's nothing wrong with me. There's nothing wrong with the technique. I can change the angle at which I'm approaching it. Many things that we've worked on have been like this, where like I'm having a hard time with, I don't know, keeping my guard up or something. And then it turns out that like footwork fixes my guard. And that's totally like changing the angle of how you're sweeping. And then there are some things that are like, that's just not mine. Like, that's not for me, which is that leaf that's just gonna stay fucking stuck in the kuti. And it's like, that's okay. I may not be a like, I don't know what example to think of, but like, I love how Karahat does this move. I'm not gonna be doing that move, but I can still love it. It's okay. It's just not mine, kind of thing. And that's okay. Like, there are fighters who are incredibly femur who suck at clinch. That's okay. They don't have to be good at clinch also. And there are clinch fighters who, you know, can't kick or whatever. That's okay. People are different. And so I made this video that was me sweeping at our house that we moved to out in the boonies. And I think that in this move, when Kevin and I moved, we were living in this one-room apartment that was getting really loud and just like high-level stress and tension. It was like the water was just getting really high. And in moving to this place out in the boonies that has foliage and like garden life around it and stuff like this, maintaining the grounds and maintaining the house, keeping it clean, stuff like this, like menial tasks have really helped me mentally and emotionally in kind of calming down about my Muay Thai too. I think that there's a big, we've been talking about trade-offs this entire time. There's a big trade-off to the convenience and ever increasing, like, you can save time with things that you're doing, right? You can order food through an app on your phone, so you don't have to go out shopping, you don't have to cook. You can pay someone to come sweep your floor for you. You can, do something in less time so you have more time that you then fill with other shit. Like, you actually never have more time. You just
more scrolling
fill it with
time.
more stuff. Totally. Like, you can get your kid to their soccer game 10 minutes faster than before so that you have 10 minutes to fill doing something else that's not really important to you. These kind of menial task things, these are a Buddhist practice. This is what monks do all day. Monks maintain the grounds of the temple. They go collect alms. They have very simple lives. And one of the things when you're doing a Vipassana retreat is to pay attention to how these very small menial tasks are basically just caring for Rup, which is the body. So if you go take a shower, being mindful about that is, I am cleaning Rup to take care of Rup.
Right.
To not be dirty is, being dirty is suffering, is uncomfortable, it's hot, you're sweating, so you wash Rup as like a way to end that suffering. Sweeping leaves, just maintaining the ground kind of thing. Like,
well, how does that connect to Muay Thai training?
Because in Muay Thai, we also fill the space in this, like, how do I express this? I hate sit-ups. I fucking hate them. If I can skip sit-ups, I will skip sit-ups all the time.
But you don't skip.
I don't, because I'm like David Goggins staring at his goddamn shoes before he does his run. Like, you have to do them. I fucking hate sit-ups. I hate them. But the reason you do sit-ups, Yod Khum Pan is like, as a knee fighter, you have to be so strong. If Diesel Noy has taught me anything, it's that as a knee fighter, you have to have super strong legs, super strong core. Is like, you do that work, and it's just work. It doesn't have to be enjoyable. It doesn't have to be meaningful. But this maintains that kind of thing. And like, for me, mentally, there's all this, like, I'm trying to improve, I'm trying to look better, I'm trying to have my technique be cleaner. Like, all of this stuff that's like, if I'm sweeping the kuti in order to make the kuti beautiful, that's the wrong attention.
Yeah,
the wrong purpose.
And that leaf is going to bug you.
And that fucking leaf, like, won't go, and there's something wrong with me that I can't beautify the thing and get rid of the leaf, kind of thing. So calming down and being like, that's just going to be there. These ones are harder than those ones. Sit-ups may never be fun for me. Yeah. They might be leaves that are hard to sweep forever. Yeah. Like, I hate the bigger leaves, but you got to sweep them, kind of thing. Is that even the stuff that you don't like in your training, this kind of menial task, when you approach it with the kind of calm, this is part of the maintenance, I think it calms the mind. Like, if you're only ever concerned about, like, how do I make my kick faster, or how do I turn my hip more, in this, like, quality of your technique.
Well, you're hinting at it, but maybe let's just talk for a minute about how you've been, like, so harsh on yourself for all those years, being really disappointed in your technique. Like, it has been like a train of negativity. Not only your technique, like literally training it and practicing it, but then also critical of yourself in fights. Mm-hmm. And it's like, what you're talking about is an approach that kind of like alleviates that history, it takes the edge off of it.
Yeah, well,
like if you want, we can talk about your kick.
It doesn't erase the stress. It doesn't make me all like calm, it'll come to me in time kind of thing. But it...
Okay, but I want to talk about your stress, like, not just all of it, like what has changed, but you're not talking about
No,
what
I'm
has
saying
it,
it hasn't
what
changed.
hasn't changed, what has it changed from? Like what, how were you 3 years ago, 5 years ago, 8 years ago? Like, part of this is that you had serious issues with certain leaves, right? You don't seem like you're following me.
No, I have not solved this. This is not something that's solved. This is like using the leaf sweeping practice
Okay.
to then apply to the strains and stresses I
All right,
have.
but
of
you're
my training.
talking around something without talking about it, which is actually how you've related to your training for 10 years.
Yeah,
like-
I'm totally stressed about the leaves. And
Yeah, but
all
you're
the
not
time.
talking about that part.
I am talking about
No,
that
you're
part.
talking about how not to do that. But there are many people who stress so much about their technique. Like, they want beautiful Thai technique. Right?
Okay.
All right, it's okay.
No, you're
I'm
going for it.
pushing
You
you.
talk about it. I don't know
No,
what you're
I
trying to say.
am trying to talk about you. Like, one of the most difficult things for you is how many years was, I'm not going to say wasted, but wasted on micro criticizing your technique.
Yeah, the reason we're struggling is because I'm not past that. I've just found a...
Yeah, but you literally won't talk about it. I don't want to argue about it. You won't literally talk about it. You're making me talk about it.
Yeah, I don't know what you want me to say about it.
Okay. That's good. I can't push you. I feel like you're uncomfortable with this thing that you don't want to talk about it.
Well, give
Like
me an
a
example.
perfect example. The story with Wung. When you went to Lana, and you're like, Wung, help me with my kick. I want a good kick, a Thai kick. You're making me tell the story.
Yeah, tell the story.
But no, you tell the story. Like, I want you to connect to this thing, which is this pain of the leaves not moving. Right?
Okay, so when I was at Lana, which was
Thank
the
you,
first
baby.
2 years, this was probably within the first 6 months, I asked Wung, who was a trainer at Lana, to help me fix my kick. And he's like, kick the bag. And I kicked the bag and he goes, it's fine. We were like, it's not fine.
Yeah, because
it's
we
it's
had
not the kick.
we had in our mind the Thai kick, right?
Yeah.
And it was very painful that you couldn't kick like a Thai.
And even fast forward 5 years or something, Karahat shows me the golden kick, and I'm trying to do the golden kick, and I can't do it, and he keeps being like, your kick's really wide. And so he tries to fix it, and I can't do it, and he's like, it's okay. Like, he's just got the, like, it's all right, it'll come eventually kind of thing. That Wung had the, like, it's fine for what it is now.
Well, no, he was like, that kick's fine for a fight. Like, that would hurt
Like,
somebody.
it's effective.
That would work.
Yeah.
It's like, you're like, no, the thing's not doing the thing. Like, wanting to correct it and perfect it. But Wung he probably had 300 fights. For him, Muay Thai is, you just use the tools. You don't have the, like, perfectly shaped hammer, made by an artisan so that you can hammer nails. If you're a carpenter, you just want a hammer that fucking is weighted okay and you just hammer nails.
Yeah, how you get the leaves off the kuti doesn't matter.
Yeah.
Like, is my sweeping technique perfect? No.
Yeah, totally.
Just get the leaves off.
Yeah, I'm just saying there's a lot of people who are stuck in the hellscape of disappointment in their own technique, and they might not think that you live in that world. That's okay if you don't want to.
I don't think that we're talking about the same thing in regard to
Okay.
what this leaf sweeping thing is, but
Well, then what to you are the leaves that won't move in Muay Thai? That you're trying to sweep them and they won't budge. What does that represent in Muay Thai training?
It's not that my kick isn't good, it's that my kick won't come out. Like, I do not think to kick or want to kick at times when that seems like the appropriate move.
Okay, and also you pull your kick.
I pull
like we
my
can
kick,
create a very long
I
list
lean back
of things.
and miss when I'm
a
totally
lot of
close
things.
enough.
We can create a big long list of things.
My punches
that
are wide. I
are
don't
wrong.
keep my guard
Yeah,
up.
wrong with your technique, right?
Yeah.
And you're like, I'm just pointing. I'm trying. I don't know why it's
But then-
5 minutes of us struggling
but then
over
there
it.
have
I'm
been-
trying to point out that you have a long laundry list of leaves that will not move, that have been very frustrating to you.
Yeah.
And there's a very long history. You've been training in Thailand for 8 years. It doesn't mean that you don't have a list of leaves that won't move. And it seems to me that your awareness of this analogy of sweeping leaves is a novel approach to things that won't move.
Yeah, and more leaves will fall. Like, it's that same thing where your kick is good for like 2 months, and then your punches start coming online and your kick changes again, and it's like, now it's not good anymore. Those leaves are sticking, whereas they didn't stick a month ago.
Totally. And I don't know, from my perspective, you're like, I haven't solved this thing. I don't want to talk about solving it. To me, you have started to solve the leaves of your technique. That you have a different attitude about you are still probably disappointed about your chicken winging punches and that you're not kicking at the right time, or whatever stories are that you tell yourself that are still powerful. But it feels like you have started to solve these technique issues by a more global, relaxed approach, which you described about in sweeping leaves.
Well,
you're doing the work without great tension,
without strain.
You
You seem to want concrete examples. It seems to be
well,
what
it
you're
helps because then
aiming
there's
for.
people in the world who are in the gym who are thinking about this.
So I was talking about a leaf being stuck in the wood and how you might have to like come from a different angle to kind of dislodge it. Or you might be sweeping a different leaf and that one happens to go at the same time. Like, it was not like I have to focus on this one thing.
Yeah.
Is that with Yodkunpan,
Yeah.
maybe, God, it was not long ago, maybe like 2 months ago, I was having this really, really intense, hard time with him being able to land open side knees. He's southpaw naturally, but he switches stance. He was landing his left knee on my right open side at will, just over and over and over and over again.
Straight, baby.
Straight. And I was just kind of like buckling. Like, my root would break, and I would just kind of like get myself in a position where basically I had no way to stop him from doing this at all.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm like, why don't I block? I think the technique is blocking. I think that getting that fucking leaf out of the wood is blocking.
Yeah, and Thai trainers will tell you, block, block. Matter of fact, in the fight, they even said it after the first round. Block more. You hear this all the time.
And so I can't block.
Yeah.
I'm not doing it, whatever. And so there's this other leaf that also needs to be addressed, that Yodkunpan is like, stand up. Like, just stand up. Like, stop hunching, stop putting your ass back. So instead of like, why don't I block? I'm going to work on my blocks. I'm going to block everything. I'm like, just stand up. Like, as much as I'm getting hit on that side, take getting hit, but just stand up. I think we talked about this in the last Muay Thai Bones. And
We talked about it somewhere.
when I stood up, all of a sudden he could not land that knee anymore.
Like a magic trick.
And it was not like, fuck you, leaf. I'm going to get this leaf to move. That leaf wasn't going to go.
Yeah.
But the reason it was stuck was not the broom. The reason it was stuck was the wood underneath it. It wasn't the leaf's fault. It was the wood had the condition of some kind of grip that made that leaf stick to it.
Yes.
So you can't change the wood. You can't change the leaf. You can change the angle of the broom, but maybe it's not going to go. Like, maybe it's just going to take some other condition.
And I honestly think that one of the more profound elements of this analogy is the wood. It's like every person is made of different wood.
Yeah.
Like, it's in different patterns, it's different hardnesses, different
textures,
exactly. Everybody is different. Some of it's genetic and how your body composition is. Some of it is emotional history. Some of it is psychological context. We spend a lot of time comparing ourselves to other people, but everybody has different wood. And if a technique is stuck on you, is stuck in your wood, it's not you're failing that it's not working.
Yeah.
And I like that you're like, change the angle of the broom, or change how you're sweeping, or go after these other leaves and leave that one alone for a while. Right?
Yeah.
But I think as someone who loves you and watched you like struggle for a very long time, you had a lot of like war against certain leaves. And it's caused you a lot of like pain and frustration. And I personally think that you're getting to this place. I think some of it is also you're taking a more global interest in your Muay, where it's no longer mechanical things that you're trying to like get the angles on. You're dealing more with the feelings of techniques. Like when you throw a Samransak punch or a Karahat kick, there's a feeling to it, and it feels like you're approaching techniques not so mechanistically, but rather how do they feel, like you're being inhabited by a spirit of something. I don't know, do you think that's possible?
I think it's similar to what we've talked about before about like impersonation, where like if you're gonna play a rock star, you can speak gibberish. Like you just fucking stand there and like do a little like Mick Jagger move and like sing gibberish, but with the like, you know, Robert Plant intonations or something, and you're a rock star all of a sudden.
Yeah.
Like nobody ever watches Sanchai and is like, God, his turn on that kick is so nice. Like it's in the vocabulary of everything else. It's in his energy. It's in like he has these classic like shuffle steps, but you're not like, where exactly is his foot landing on that shuffle? Like it doesn't matter. It's about the kind of like,
well, he has beautiful Muay Thai, but he did not get beautiful Muay Thai trying to make beautiful Muay Thai.
Yeah.
Like that's not really where it comes from. It comes from a more expressive thing. I feel like you're doing that much more. I think also because you're sparring so much more, you don't have time to fucking fret about the angles of things.
Yeah.
That you're grabbing things that work. You're using the words that come to you.
Yeah, well, it's also the pedagogy in the West of like you learn this technique and then you perfect this technique and then it goes with that technique and this is the combination that it works in and things like that. It's not fluent and it's not natural. That's not the pedagogy of Thailand. In Thailand, you learn techniques as they go, but you learn the energy first and foremost. Like you have the conversation without having to use the word of the day. Like that word will eventually work its way into your vocabulary. You just learn it and then eventually it'll work its way in, but it's not like use this word in 4 sentences today. Like it's very unnatural. And I think that being super stressed has been my method of like why can I not remember that word that I learned 2 days ago? I can't remember that word. It won't come to me when I want it. Instead of I'm trying to express something and that word didn't come to me, there are these 3 words that are synonymous that kind of go around it that I can still explain it. There are very like funny examples of people speaking a second language and they forget what something is and so they just describe it. Like some guy was speaking Chinese and he forgot the word for eggs, so he or no, he forgot the word for chicken, so he pointed at an egg and said, "Where's the mother?" Like, that's not wrong.
No,
like, it's
no.
kind of amazing.
Totally.
And I think it's kind of like that. It's instead of like fretting about memorizing the vocabulary, which I've done for a really, really long time, it's about the like sweeping of the leaf is not about actually like perfectly cleaning the floor. It's about maintaining.
Every day you sweep, right? So every day you go to training and you set about cleaning the place.
Yeah.
Right? You're doing your bag work. I mean, you do need to know something about technique, and correction is helpful, but obsessing about some small thing is probably counterproductive.
Yeah. And it's not going to fix it.
And I'm going to say this, we'll talk about it a year from now or something, but I'm going to tell you so much of what Westerners fret about their techniques and everything has nothing to do with mechanics and learning the right angles and the proper positions, because that's how everything's taught. It's about growing eyes. Your techniques are starting to flower because of all your sparring. And sparring a lot as an adult is dangerous. You can get fucking CTE. It's not ideal. Who you're sparring with could be disastrous. So I can't say everybody should be sparring a lot, but I'm telling you, so much of this, the Thais get it when they're kids.
Yeah.
They get all the play, all the improvisation, all the stuff when they're kids, so it gets baked in.
This is the thing. I was actually just talking to someone about this a couple weeks ago, which is that Westerners talk about Thai kids and how like Thais are so good because they started when they were kids, with this clear inference that like it's because they've spent so much time. Like if you start when you're 8, then by the time you're 18 you have 10 years, and so you're great. It's that 10,000 hour rule of like how you use that 10 years. To me, the reason starting when you're a kid is so valuable, rather than that you get 10 years by the time you're 18, so you're like you started ahead of the pack kind of thing. It's that you start pre-judgment. Nobody fucking laughs at a 5-year-old for not being able to ride a bike. If you're learning to ride a bike when you're 18, it's funny that you fall over. It's like, why do you not know how to do this? If you're 5, everyone's like, they're just learning.
Yay! He pedaled 3 times before he fell over.
And like they expect you to fall over kind of thing. It's like you're gonna fall down kind of thing.
Yeah.
It's like watching Pinu train the kids, the Jade Dragon set. He says it's like it's what we say for herding cats. It's something about like trying to keep crabs in a basket, like you're basically constantly moving them. You know they're gonna cry. It's just when, like, and then you just tolerate that they're gonna cry, and eventually they'll grow out of it, kind of thing. You can't do that when you're 20. Like, you're embarrassed, you're afraid. It's that totally, like, biblical who told you you were naked kind of thing. Where it's like, you already have the, like, people are looking at me that you don't have when you're 8.
And I feel like that is really the whole problem of Westerners coming to the Muay Thai of Thailand is it was never baked into you. And even if you were in fucking karate tournaments, you were not playing at Muay Thai with the low pressure playfulness.
But real dominance.
But it's dominance, but it's play. It's like dominance how like puppies are dominant over other puppies. That there is a liberty of experience that you have as a kid that gets baked in, and then all the technique just flows out of it.
Yeah.
But now in the West, we learn all the fucking technique and try to create it, make it smooth, make it the proper angle, and all of the connective tissue of play. I think I'm gonna get gas here. Is missing.
And we're impatient because we
and
feel time differently.
But I think also that, well, we can keep this going. I think also that oh, look at that mountain, baby. Dragon tooth. I think really the key to all of this, all of the technique, is the eyes, the growing of the eyes from your hour of difficult sparring.
This first one.
No.
Oh.
It's not it.
Define it.
Where's 91?
I don't see it.
You want to ask her?
มี 91 ไหมคะ Okay. Oh, okay.
They don't
He
have.
says she says E20 is the same, but if you want to try it a different place.
Yeah, no.
Okay.
I don't want E20. Where's the different place next door?
You just have to go to the next gas station.
Oh, okay. So, but what I'm saying to you is that the sweeping actions I think, are paralleled by the fact that you're sparring an hour hard with Yokumpan every day, and the techniques are cohering with each other. And if something's not coming, you don't have time to fret about it.
Yeah, totally.
You know what I mean?
Totally. You're launched into the now every second.
Every second. But it's very hard to do that as an adult or an experienced fighter, and to just relentlessly do this. But it's like so much of what frustrates Westerners, I think, and they get very perfectionist about, would be alleviated if they had eyes and they could see and feel. And how to get that is not easy. It's not. I don't think there's an easy way to do that as an adult. It's kind of like trying to become like a poet in another language that you were not naturally born to. It can be done. Nabokov was a fucking poet in English.
Jesus, he's better at English than I am.
Yeah, but it's not easily done.
Yeah.
Okay, that's good. Okay. This will be the last subject of this epic Muay Thai Bones. It's well over 3 hours, I think, already.
Yep.
But this is how we do, right?
That's how we do.
This is how we do.
We talk about stuff.
And we just keep going down the rabbit hole. This is a really interesting thought. If you've followed us for a long time, you know that we're not like thrilled by the new entertainment Muay Thai formats that are becoming popular in Thailand, but also elsewhere, like One Championship. They basically have created they've created 3-round fights instead of 5-round fights, and they're very they changed the scoring to emphasize aggression, to create a clashing kind of style, which is quite different than traditional Muay Thai, where defense is prized, right? And so I read an interesting article. God, I wish I had the notes on it. I will link it on the fight site. And it actually ended up being 2 articles, because another article was referenced in it, and it was about the UFC and the rights and the protections of UFC fighters. And this author did a kind of economic analysis of the UFC, and one of the points he made was really interesting, which was, because the UFC prizes aggression, all the fighters in the UFC make offense the focus of their training. Everything is about becoming a more and more dynamic, marketable, offensive fighter. And for that reason, defense is underdeveloped in UFC fighters. And he's like, what he was interested in was, when you have this kind of setup, what you end up doing is exploiting the labor potential and the lives of fighters, because these fighters learn how to be more offensive, and they don't learn defensive principles at a high level.
Which compromises their longevity.
Yeah, you shot right to the end there.
Oh, sorry, I thought that's what you're getting to.
Well, not just their longevity, it's their safety. It's a fighter who you only give them guns and you give them no bulletproof vests. then you just have people shooting guns at each other.
Right.
And he's like, his argument was CTE issues, concussion issues are highly problematic in a sport where you don't even really train fighters to defend themselves. Now, of course, we're talking about in a very broad sense. Of course, UFC fighters know how to defend themselves. He's talking about a propensity within the sport, that the sport prizes dynamic, offensive exchanges. And so, generally, where the investment, the training time investment, and the knowledge base that grows is offense. And he's like, so what you really are going to have is fighters that are going to be injured, impaired with CTE, impaired for a lifetime, that are kind of like churned up by the powerful corporation of UFC, and then just used as an entertainment value and then discarded.
It's turning it into harder labor than it has
Harder,
to be.
Exactly. And I think when I read this, it was kind of a small point he was making in a much larger picture about unfair labor practices, which is interesting in its own right. But I immediately made the connection to this, oh, look at that shrine of roosters.
It's like 800 rooster statues on this shrine that we just went by.
I made this connection to this movement that's happening in Thailand with entertainment Muay Thai, which is a much more aggressive, less technically sophisticated mode of fighting, which appeals to a much broader audience. And very good arguments are being made that these promotions actually could help save Muay Thai, because much broader appeal.
It's not dependent on gambling.
Appeals to a younger demographic, which has a different sensibility of what's excitement. But when you have exciting clashes, you're having something maybe that is more international in flavor, right? And there's good arguments for that. And then also arguments for the entertainment Muay Thai being good for Muay Thai fighters, because they're generating income they wouldn't have, like big purses that wouldn't exist otherwise. Paths to stardom, like Rot Dang is a great example. If he didn't have these kinds of shows, he would probably have much lesser stature. Stamp became a star out of one. If she had been in female Muay Thai, she would have literally been nobody.
Yeah.
Like unknown, relatively unknown, maybe with a world title or something. This is what's kind of interesting to me. It's like the UFC, under this author's, and it'll be linked in the description, the UFC, in its business model, is already practicing aggression-first fighting. And we're already seeing the effects of what happens when fighters train to the rule set. Much of what we talk about in terms of the advocacy for Muay Thai in Thailand is care for the fighters. And I'm like, if we're moving towards aggro fighting, expressing this kind of Western internationalized concept of clashing aggression, you're basically limiting the careers of these people. One of the more striking things, and people ask us about this a lot, about Muay Thai, traditional Muay Thai, like customary Muay Thai of Thailand, is almost nobody we run into with hundreds of fights is mentally impaired.
Yep.
You can occasionally run into an old fighter who's punch drunk. Almost all of those fighters that we run into also box.
Yep.
Boxing is much more
Head impact.
taxing because there's a lot of head targeting and they fight in a closer proximity. It's much longer rounds. So yeah, there's reasons why Western boxing will take a toll. But one of the interesting things about Muay Thai fighters and old Muay Thai fighters, and we've been around so many of them, almost none of them are mentally diminished that we can tell. Like, there's not a punch drunk problem. And these are people that devoted their lives to fighting. Some of them fought 20 years. And it's very likely the case. The reason for this is because defense is prized in Thailand. It's prized, that's how you can win a fight.
Yep.
By being evasive or controlling the space in a positive way. The greatest fighters are often thought of as, the female fighters are all the defensive masters. If you change Muay Thai for the sake of big fight purses, more broadly appealing, you're going to eliminate the defensive speciality of Thailand because everyone will train since they're a kid towards aggression, like what's happened in the UFC. That was my intro.
I will say that in doing the library, because I talked to all these Golden Age fighters about how Muay Thai has changed from when they fought to now, it's weird because there's this like contradiction where in the Golden Age they fought much harder. They're like, we fought to the death in the Golden Age. And they're like, fighters now don't, kind of thing. But they also all talk about how your style determines how long you can fight. Every single fighter who has made some comment about this has been like, if you're femur, like if you understand technique and defense, they're like, you can fight for a long time. You can have a very long career. They're like, if you're gonna like charge in and basically be like Samson or Longsawan, you can't fight for very long. They're like, it just wears you up. Like you basically have a short lifespan. But even
those fighters, like Longsawan, like brawly fighters, some wrong talk, they knew how to defend themselves.
Totally.
Like, you couldn't live in the sport unless you understood spacing, positioning, like high-level defense. It doesn't mean you're a defensive, like, showman of defense, but defense was woven into the fabric of the skill of Muay Thai.
Right.
Right?
But it's also the judging rewards defensiveness, rewards evasiveness, rewards
100%.
skill.
And I'll never forget, and I'm not picking on Max Muay Thai, all the promotions are the same. Max just led the way. They were the journey. But I remember when Max Stadium opened, and literally, I don't know what happens at Max now, but Thais had no idea what Max was really shooting for, and they were given a rule sheet that literally said in Thai, if you go backwards, you will lose.
Yep.
Do you remember that?
Yeah.
It was like literally in the rules. Understandable, they had to be like extreme in their rule descriptions because Thais didn't even have a concept of this.
Yeah.
Because in Thailand, traditionally, if you're ahead, you back up.
Well, it's the same. If you told a Western fighter who had like no concept of Thai scoring, if they're like,
if you go forward, you'll lose.
If you go forward in round 5 when you're already winning, you'll lose. They're what? Like if you
Which
don't
is true.
go backwards,
Which can be true in Thailand.
If you don't go backwards, you lose.
Totally. But this is not to say. I mean, I think the entertainment Muay Thai arguments, ethical arguments, and like marketing arguments are really interesting and complex. It's not all bad for me at all. Like there's pros and cons, trade-offs. We need to also think to ourselves, if we remove the incentive for defensive prowess, then the actual health of the fighters will radically change. Like, you will develop. We saw what happened. We talked about this with Muay Thai when clinch was taken out. Gyms change immediately what they're training.
Yep.
Like, they look at the rules set and they're like, we go train to the rules.
Well, it's
we
like-
train to win.
It's like you get a memo, and you're like, okay,
Totally. And
we're on it.
everyone changes.
Yeah.
And it's like, even what was Joe Hong Tong was talking about Maggie fighting on, what was it, Super Champ or Hardcore
I think
or
she
something?
does hardcore. Yeah.
And he was like, it's just like elbowing the bag. Like, all you have to do is, like, you'd elbow the bag 50 times, elbow your partner, your opponent 50 times.
He's like, it's all offense. You just-
Yeah, it's just boom, boom, boom,
Yeah.
boom. And he was basically saying, this is just like bag work, really. This isn't actually fighting.
Yeah.
It's like not having a...
It's a gas station.
Is it? Okay. Which is to say, he's already training her for, okay, well, you want to do bag work, Muay Thai? We can do that. Like, he's already training her in that way because that's what the rules are asking.
Right. Well,
This is what I'm saying, is that if entertainment Muay Thai becomes the dominant form of Muay Thai in 5 years, all the Thai boys will be learning it from age 6 or 10.
I don't see 91 here either.
Yeah, maybe they do call it something else.
Do you want to get the E20?
No, let's just get 95.
Okay.
I don't know what this other thing is. Sorry, we're getting gas, guys.
But she suggested E20 when I said 91, so that might be closer.
Okay, but we don't need to discuss it on the podcast.
Okay. Well, here's the thing that to me is interesting about this and this change, is that very recently, like in the past couple of weeks, you have to turn off and open the thing. Very recently, like in the past couple of weeks, the female fights on these cards had a lot of elbows and blood. Like they were very like bloody.
Oh, you're
fights.
talking about the promotional,
On
this
hardcore and
entertainment
Super
Muay Thai.
Champ,
Yeah,
yeah. And the comments in Thai from like the news sources that were sharing these kept being like, now women are like men. They're damaging each other and hard and blah, blah, blah. And the thing is that it's not like female Muay Thai wasn't hard. I've received so many fucking cuts in my time. Like, people fight hard, people throw elbows, but we've seen female fighters, Thai female fighters who go on these shows, and they cannot not fight the way that has been rewarding for their entire fight careers, which is defensive, evasive.
Well, you get the
technical,
lead, and then
right,
you defend
and then
the lead,
you move. Like,
and then
you
you
have
move.
to. It's like you have to keep going forward. Is this like what is happening? So now that women are starting to keep going forward because that's what's rewarded, this is the outcome of that. The kind of damage that they're getting is because it's being rewarded to go this way because they're not being rewarded for the way they fought before.
Totally.
It's not that they like couldn't. It's that you didn't have to. It was like,
Well, but they also couldn't because
you would lose.
you would lose, so you didn't develop that skill.
Yeah.
They actually had to, and because we're also talking about like the pros and cons of these shows, it is really good. It's good for female Muay Thai to harden up some and not be such a point fighting sport
Right.
in Thailand. I think Thai female fighters, one second, we're paying. Thai female fighters have benefited from these promotions in developing their own Muay.
ขอบคุณค่ะ
So again, not all bad. I'm talking about more like this UFC point, which is making a point about labor and about the long-term effects of entertainment Muay Thai, aggression-first Muay Thai, if it becomes the dominant commercial force in Thailand. And it's more, so there's an ethical dimension, which is like, if you care about the fighters, people are like, oh, Rodang's making 1 million baht. Don't you care about the fighter? Sure, but will Rodang have CTE? Now, I don't think Rodang's actually the issue, because Rodang grew up in fairly traditional Muay Thai, where defense is rewarded. Rodang can defend himself. it's not, Rodang's not the issue, the moral issue. It's that it's the 10-year-old starting, trying to be Rodang. He's not going to grow up in the more complex, finessed. Like, Rodang is exciting because he learned how to track down and chase down really good defensive, evasive fighters.
Right.
So he's the bull. He's tracked down matadors that have been rewarded for being great matadors. So actually his stock, I've made this point elsewhere, his stalking ability is so exciting because it was done in an arms race against very rewarded defensive specialists. You've got to be a great stalking fighter in order to catch these guys, because the judging will reward the defensive fighter.
I think this might not be recording anymore.
Really? It's flashing here.
Okay, keep going.
I don't know.
Okay.
You think that...
If this changes to 2:30, it's going. Sorry, go ahead.
Okay, it looks like it's running here.
Okay.
Can you look at that time?
Yeah.
Okay, so what I was... Sorry, we had a little technical thing. So what I was saying was, once you take out the defensive emphasis, you're actually going to drop down the skill level of even the aggressive fighter, because the aggressive fighter isn't going to have to learn how to catch great matadors, because matadorship will not work. It's just two bulls.
Yeah.
So then you just get bull on bull, bull on bull, and then you get Muay Thai kids learning how to fight under a more rudimentary, aggression-first reward system, and they will not even bother to learn defense. Like, yes, block your head, common defense, like how to block punches, but the more sophisticated elements of defense that make Thailand's Muay Thai so special is this, it won't even be invested in.
Yeah.
At least to the degree that it has been.
Well, and we have to say that there's like real examples of this, where there was an incredible, in the golden age, body throws and body locks in the clinch was a whole fucking style, very technical, very like, there were people who were incredible at it, people who were okay at it, but it was like a whole thing. They don't score body locks anymore, and you can maybe be reprimanded for it a little
or
bit.
They score against them.
That's what I mean.
Like you
if
can,
it doesn't work, it works against you. So they stopped teaching it and they stopped using it, and it's just gone. Like there will not be. There's like a little bit, like Seksan in round 4 will start body locking, but it's not to the like degree that Nam Kabun was doing it, or that you can see, like, who was that? Chmuk Pet against Sanctianoi or something. But like, it was this whole thing, and now it's gone. So to be like, oh, people will just be more aggressive is like, no, this entire side will atrophy.
It'll atrophy is the word. And then the question is, how much will it atrophy? And it might atrophy strongly. Another element of this also is one reason why I think aggression fighting is so prevalent in the West, aside from just socioeconomic, psychological reasons, like Westerners use their sports to process aggression, let's say. And it appeals like working class. There's a working class appeal. Offense is much easier to teach than defense.
Yeah.
You can teach combos. You can get a whole classroom of, if you're not a super experienced coach and you have a gym, you can get people memorizing combos on the bag. You can get people holding for combos in pairs. Like offense, the gym business model is made for offense.
Yeah.
To learn defense, to learn to see, is much more time invested, and also I think it takes a more experienced coach's eye.
in the oral history of the pedagogy of Muay Thai in Thailand from these legends and crews in the Muay Thai Library also,
Yeah.
they totally talk about how long it took before they could hit anything. How boring it was as a kid that you had to like do all of this marching, drilling, blocking stuff before you could finally hit something. The way we teach is you fucking slam on the bag day one. Like you walk in and you're hitting the bag as hard as you can because you have no technique.
Yeah.
Like offense actually comes second
Totally.
in a lot of ways.
But not only that, when we interviewed Sirimon Khan, who's now passed, but a legend in the 70s, fighter of the year, 79, I think.
78.
72.
Oh.
I
Yes.
think 72.
Sorry.
But who else do we? Karahat. There were several legends that we asked, who trained you? Who gave you your style? And he's like, they're all like, nobody.
They're like, my trainer was 80.
No, but
He didn't do anything.
nobody instructed you in your like follow this ideal model.
Yeah.
Yes, there were trainers who were like, no, point your toe or whatever. But largely what really produced the fighters was just watching fights, going to watch fights, and sparring and drilling stuff. Like, it was an organic process.
Do it.
You were not memorizing offensive patterns. And I'm like, to learn defense, to learn to be able to control the fight space is a very higher advanced complex thing. You can tell someone, jab, jab, cross, just keep jab, jab, crossing. And at a moderate level of fighting, you could win the fight.
Yeah, especially if, in the West, defense is never taught and you have like an offense that someone doesn't know how to defend. It's kind of
Totally. Like if
like the
if you're
Fairtex
going-
girls learning a 1-2 is like killing.
Well,
their
that's a
competition.
good example of the Fairtex girls. Many of them were good, decent female Muay Thai fighters, like the Thai fighters, like Stamp and Wonder Girl. But a lot of their success is they've been taught to insist on a right hand or a 1-2, and to just really commit to a very basic punch attack. It's successful because
Nobody defends it.
people were not defending it. The point is, you can teach offense in a pretty basic way. To teach defense, it takes a lot more investment. And when you have a gym setup where you're training fighters to win purses, whatever the dominant rule or aesthetic for those purses is going to cut at the thing that is the most time investing. If the most time investing is defense and they don't reward defense anymore, why would you teach it?
Yeah.
You might teach it because this is Muay Thai and this is the tradition and this is part of having to be a fighter, but eventually it'll just atrophy. And I guess the thing that really appealed to me about this article about the UFC and labor ethics is, if you turn Muay Thai into kind of relatively unguarded offensive specialists, you're going to be grinding through fighters, shortening their careers, more head injuries, more punch drunk, concussion issues.
And not getting paid more for it.
And, well, they might get paid more for a time, but maybe not. And there'll be low levels of fighting like that. I don't know. I'm not going to be doomsday about this, but it was just a really interesting ethical discussion. It's not, and it ties in with this larger, it's my pinned tweet where I wrote about this analogy, and I've used it before, which is that Thailand has a very rich cultural history of martial arts knowledge that's been developed out of 150 years of hundreds of thousands of fights every year. Thailand is comparable to old growth forest, where you have old growth beautiful teak trees or old hardwood. They've been growing for 50 years, 70 years, 120 years. If you are a logging company and you're like, look at all this wealth here, and you cut all the old growth down, yeah, you can make a lot of money cutting down the growth, but it's gone.
Yeah.
And I'm like, when you put an accomplished Thai fighter, like they like to take older but very famous Thai fighters like Yotsen Klai fighting on one, or Rodang fighting on one, or whatever you're doing, and you're like, oh, this is some pretty high-level Muay Thai. It's not one that made them high-level Muay Thai. You're using old growth.
Yeah.
You're using something that grew up in a very different sport than the one that you're performing in. And yes, they can perform.
There's another gas station. Oh, we got gas.
Yeah.
I forgot. Sorry.
But for a time, while you're using that old growth, yes, the level is high. Yes, there is defensive prowess, right? But I'm like, once you change the sport, once you change the incentive, it might no longer be.
Yeah.
Did I lose you on that last bit?
No, I agree with you.
I find the ethical part of this really interesting.
To me, it's very interesting that, like, it's not interesting that Rotong has become famous in the West because his style totally fits with what the West knows what to look at and how to read, and they like it. The thing is, he stands out in Thai Muay Thai because that's not how Thais fight. Like,
Yeah.
he's unusual. Yodlek Pet is unusual. Seksan is unusual in that most Thai fighters are not like that. You can transplant it onto the international stage and it fits and people know how to look at it, and so they become famous on this bigger stage too. But if you then have the next generation coming up like that, and it kind of like floods it like dilutes the concentrated group or something,
Yeah.
it won't be special anymore.
Well, not only won't it be special, it'll be a devolved version of it.
Yeah.
The reason why they're like Rodang is so good or exciting is he's had to fucking chase rabbits and catch them,
Right.
or almost catch them. And I'm like, if you had just put Rodang against sluggers, he would have become a very different fighter. Like, it wouldn't have been the same thing. I don't know. I think that was pretty good. You want to say goodbye on the podcast? Or did I surprise you?
No, you usually do the sign off.
Yeah, but I'm alerting you.
I am aware.
You have to cue up the music.
I'm ready for the music.
Are you ready?
You have to thank everybody first.
Yeah. Okay, so this has been a long one. It's actually, the sun is going down. So you've been with us straight on through, driving across Thailand. Thank you to everyone that supports Sylvie through Patreon. It allows her to fight all over the country and pursue historic numbers and push herself to a Yod Muay status that hopefully lift up other female fighters and male fighters too. And we're just taking you along with us for the ride and sharing with you our deeper thoughts about Muay Thai. But if you're watching this on YouTube and you want to, I think we have 16 or something
already?
episodes, most of them around 2 or 3 hours like this, already up, available for subscription. You can get the audio of those as a patron. Even the $1 patron will get you that. Thank you to our sponsors.
Onyx MMA and Loblo.
Onyx MMA and Lobo are the official sponsors of Sylvie. And I guess we'll try to do this the next time you travel.
Yeah, we're going down south again. We don't know if we're driving or not.
Yeah. So, cue music.
Dun, 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 dun.
Da-na-na.
Da-na-na, da-na-na. Ba-na-na.
That's very good, baby. Now, how are we going to stop this if your app doesn't work?
Bye.
Oh, it just recognized. Fucking awesome. Can you check the batteries on these? See if anything failed.
I've been checking.
Oh, you have? You're such a little cootie sweeper.